There are few names in the blood-soaked annals of the 41st millennium that inspire such universal revulsion as that of Lorgar Aurelian, the Golden Sun, the Urizen, the first heretic. Across 10,000 years of imperial history, his name has been synonymous with betrayal, corruption, and the fall of mankind from grace. Yet in the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium, as the imperium of man struggles against the wounds torn by the Great Rift, even the most unthinkable possibilities begin to stir in the warp's malevolent depths. The galaxy burns with renewed fury in these dark days. 2 years have passed since the return of the Lord Regent Robut Gilliman, and still the imperium reels from crisis to crisis like a ship caught in an eternal storm. The cicatrix maledictum stretches across the stars like a wound that will not heal, splitting the domains of mankind in two. Whole sectors remain cut off from the light of the Astronomicon, their populations left to face the darkness alone. On 1,000 worlds, Imperial Guard regiments fight desperate holding actions against horrors that should not exist. Space Marine chapters spread thin across battlefronts that multiply faster than reinforcements can arrive. The very fabric of reality grows weak, and through those weaknesses, ancient evils seep like poison into an open wound. But imagine for a moment if the worst of those evils was not some mindless demon or alien horror. Imagine if it wore the face of a son of the Emperor himself. Imagine if the architect of humanity's greatest betrayal stirred once more from his contemplation, his eyes fixed not on the Eye of Terror, where he has brooded for millennia, but on the wounded imperium beyond. Lorgar Aurelian was not merely a traitor. He was the first traitor. While Horus earned infamy as the war master who led the rebellion that shattered the Emperor's dream, it was Lorgar who planted the seeds of that rebellion in fertile soil. It was Lorgar who discovered the Chaos Gods and proclaimed them worthy of worship. It was Lorgar who corrupted his brother Primarchs one by one, turning them against their father through whispered heresies and seductive promises of power. The Horus heresy bore another's name, but it was born from Lorgar's twisted faith. For 10,000 years, he has remained hidden in the Eye of Terror, meditating on truths that would shatter lesser minds. The Word-Bearer's Legion, his sons in blood and spirit, have carried on his dark work across the galaxy, but their father has remained absent from the battlefield. The Imperium has grown accustomed to his silence, taking comfort in the belief that whatever madness consumed him in the aftermath of the heresy has left him lost in contemplation, no longer a threat to the material realm. Yet across the war-torn sectors of the Imperium Nihilus, strange reports filter through the damaged astropathic networks. On the shrine world of benediction, pilgrims speak in hushed tones of sermons that stray from orthodox doctrine. The priests claim to preach of the Emperor's glory, but their words carry undertones that make the faithful uneasy. On the forge world of Metallica, tech adepts report anomalous readings in their sacred machines as if the very Omnissiah grows restless. On distant Cadia's replacement, the fortress world of Vigilus, Lord Imperial Guard commanders note a troubling rise in religious fervor among their troops, a fanaticism that borders on mania. The Imperial authorities dismiss these reports as the inevitable aftermath of the Great Rift's passage. Religious upheaval follows trauma, they reason. Populations subjected to warp storms and demon incursions naturally seek comfort in extreme faith. The Ministorum issues standard proclamations about maintaining doctrinal purity. The Inquisition investigates the most serious cases and burns the occasional heretic. Life continues as it always has in the grim darkness of the far future. But there are whispers that travel faster than astropathic messages, carried on currents deeper than the warp itself. In the underhives of 100 worlds, occultists gather in secret to speak of the Golden Word, a new revelation that promises to reconcile all faiths under a single truth. On the battlefields where Imperial Guard face the enemies of mankind, commissars report soldiers muttering prayers that follow no recognized litany. In the chapels of Space Marine monasteries, chaplains find their sermons interrupted by battle brothers asking questions about the nature of faith itself, questions that have no easy answers. The signs are subtle, scattered across light years, and filtered through layers of bureaucracy and disbelief. No single servant of the Emperor sees the pattern forming in the darkness. Each incident remains isolated, explained away, filed in archives that stretch across continents. The Imperium's vast machinery of administration grinds on, at processing reports and issuing responses with the same mechanical efficiency it has maintained for 10 millennia. Yet something stirs in the spaces between stars, in the realm where thought becomes reality, and belief shapes the very fabric of existence. The word-bearers have always understood that faith is power, that conviction can reshape worlds. Now, as the Imperium's faith wavers under the weight of endless war and cosmic horror, an opportunity presents itself. The wounded galaxy calls out for salvation, for meaning in the face of overwhelming darkness, and in the eye of terror, something ancient and terrible begins to answer that call. The first heretic has spent 10,000 years in contemplation, learning truths that would drive mortals mad. He has gazed into the heart of chaos and emerged not destroyed, but transformed. Where once he was uncertain, seeking validation from gods and fathers who would not provide it, now he possesses the terrible certainty of absolute conviction. He has seen the end of all things and found it beautiful. The time of waiting draws to a close. The galaxy bleeds, and blood calls to blood. Faith cries out for direction, and who better to provide it than the one who first revealed the poverty of the Emperor's truth? The word-bearer fleets have remained hidden in the warp storms for millennia, but storms eventually break. When they do, they will carry with them a message that will shake the foundations of the Imperium itself. For Lorgar Aurelian is no longer merely the Primarch of the word-bearers. He has become something more, something worse. He has become the herald of a new age, where the line between divine worship and damnation dissolves entirely. The golden word he brings will offer the Imperium everything it has ever wanted: unity of faith, certainty and purpose, victory over its enemies. The price for these gifts will seem so small at first. Only later will the faithful realize what they have truly purchased with their devotion. The Imperium stands at a crossroads it does not yet recognize. In the sectors beyond the Great Rift, strange sermons echo through cathedral spires. In the depths of space, word-bearer ships emerge from warp storms that have hidden them since the heresy itself. And in the eye of terror, a figure clad in golden armor raises his head for the first time in 10,000 years, his burning eyes fixed on the Imperium that cast him out. The first heretic stirs, the galaxy trembles. The war for humanity's soul is about to begin anew. In the eye of terror, where time flows like poisoned honey and space bends to the whims of hungering gods, something that was once a son of the Emperor opens eyes that have been closed for 10,000 years. The realm around him writhes with colors that have no names, shaped by thoughts that mortal minds could never comprehend. Here, in the heart of the galaxy's greatest wound, Lorgar Aurelian emerges from contemplation that has lasted longer than entire civilizations. He is no longer the uncertain seeker who once knelt before the Emperor, desperate for validation. The millennia of meditation have burned away his doubts like chaff before flame. Where once stood a Primarch torn between competing faiths, now rises a being of absolute conviction. His golden armor gleams with an inner fire that owes nothing to reflection and everything to the truths he has absorbed from the warp itself. The word-bearer, the Urizen, the first heretic, has become something more terrible than any title could encompass. He has become certainty incarnate. The chamber where he has sat in contemplation for so long bears the marks of his transformation. Walls of black stone pulse with veins of molten gold that spell out truths in languages that predate human speech. The air itself trembles with power barely contained, as if reality struggles to accommodate the weight of absolute faith made manifest. Around him, lesser demons cower in reverence, not as subjects before a master, but as apostles before a prophet who has gazed into the heart of existence and found it beautiful. Or Lorgar rises from his throne of fused bone and cursed metal, his movements carrying the fluid grace of a predator that has never known doubt. The word-bearers who have maintained their vigil outside his sanctum fall to their knees as his presence washes over them. These are not the broken renegades who fled Terra 10 millennia ago. These are warriors reforged in the crucible of absolute faith, their armor inscribed with litanies that make reality itself weep. Dark apostles who have spent centuries perfecting their understanding of the primordial truth bow their heads as their gene father passes among them. Yet it is not to his sons that Lorgar first turns his attention. In the swirling maelstrom of the eye, the four powers of chaos regard their most devoted servant with something approaching approval. Khorne, the blood god, whose realm echoes with eternal war. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, whose crystalline maze contains all possible futures. Nurgle, the plague lord, whose garden blooms with beautiful decay. Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure, whose palace rings with perfect agonies. Each has touched Lorgar during his long meditation, sharing fragments of their infinite wisdom. But now, as he stands before the swirling vortex that serves as their collective manifestation, Lorgar sees something that even his fellow Primarchs never comprehended. The four are not separate entities, locked in eternal competition. They are facets of a greater truth, aspects of a unity so profound that mortal minds fragment it into comprehensible pieces. War, change, decay, and excess are not opposing forces, but complementary elements of existence itself. The Emperor sought to deny this truth, to impose his sterile vision of order upon a cosmos that thrives on chaos. In doing so, he became the greatest heretic of all. The revelation that floods through Lorgar is not mere understanding, but transformation. The golden fire that burns in his eyes spreads through his enhanced physiology, rewriting him at a level deeper than flesh or bone. He is still a Primarch, still possessed of his superhuman capabilities, but he has transcended the limitations that his creator imposed upon him. Where the Emperor sought to create tools for his grand design, Lorgar has become an instrument of a far grander purpose. The communion with the Four reveals to him the true scope of their plan. The great rift that splits the galaxy is not merely a wound torn by Magnus's folly or Abaddon's ambition, but it is a deliberate preparation, a reshaping of reality's fabric to accommodate a new age of faith. The Imperium staggers under the weight of constant war and existential dread, its populations crying out for meaning in the face of overwhelming darkness. They have been prepared, whether they know it or not, for a revelation that will unite all of humanity under a single, pure faith. Lorgar understands now what he could not grasp during the heresy. Victory was never meant to be achieved through crude conquest or the simple overthrow of the Emperor. Such methods belong to lesser minds like Horus, who saw only the surface of the cosmic struggle. True victory requires the transformation of belief itself, the gentle guidance of faith from falsehood to truth. The Imperium must be saved from its own ignorance, and led to embrace the gods who have always been its true masters. The word-bearer, fleets that have sheltered in the eye of terror for 10,000 years, begin to stir at their Primarch's awakening. These are not the ragged remnants that fled the Emperor's wrath after Horus's defeat. They are perfected instruments of faith, their crews having spent millennia in communion with the deeper mysteries of chaos. Their ships bear the scars of long war, but also the blessings of the four powers. Weapons that fire concentrated belief instead of mere energy. Shields powered by absolute conviction rather than crude technology. Crews who have transcended the need for fear or doubt. Dark Apostle Cor Farron, ancient and terrible in his ascension to demonhood, prostrates himself before his Gene Father. The bitter old priest who first taught Lorgar of gods worthy of worship now seems small in the presence of what his student has become. Yet there is pride in his burning eyes as he receives new commandments, fresh revelations to carry to the material realm. The time for hiding is over. The galaxy calls for salvation, and the word-bearers will answer. The first strike is not violence, but revelation. On the world of Meridian's Rest, in the Imperium Nihilus, where the Astronomican's light barely penetrates, a word-bearer strike cruiser emerges from the warp with its guns silent and its vox channels open. The Imperial defenders prepare for battle, but instead of assault craft, they receive a transmission that penetrates every communications array on the planet simultaneously. It is Lorgar's voice, speaking with the authority of absolute truth. The words he speaks are simple, almost innocent in their construction. He talks of faith and unity, of the Emperor's true will and humanity's glorious destiny. Yet beneath the familiar phrases lies a current of power that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to the soul. Imperial Guard troopers laying down their arms to kneel in confused reverence. Planetary Defense Force officers finding themselves nodding along to heresies they cannot quite identify. Tech priests discovering that their sacred machines respond to prayers they have never heard before. Within hours, the entire world has surrendered without a shot being fired. The planetary governor declares a new understanding of the Imperial Creed, one that embraces truths that the hidebound Ministorum has forgotten. The population celebrates their liberation from ignorance with fervor that borders on ecstasy. Yet they still fly the Aquila, still proclaim loyalty to the Emperor, still consider themselves faithful servants of the Imperium. They simply understand now what true faith actually means. The pattern repeats across 17 worlds in the span of a single month. Word-bearer fleets emerge from the warp storms not as conquerors, but as liberators, bringing enlightenment to populations that have suffered in darkness for too long. Each world that accepts the new teaching becomes a beacon for others, transmitting the golden word through astropathic networks that carry it further than any physical fleet could travel. Yet even as his influence spreads, Lorgar himself remains within the eye of terror, completing preparations that dwarf the scope of any single world's conversion. The true faith requires more than scattered victories. It demands a foundation solid enough to support the weight of universal revelation. In the deepest sanctums of his daemon world, Lorgar begins the work of crafting weapons that will pierce not flesh but belief itself. The four powers watch their champions' efforts with approval that manifests as blessings upon his work. Khorne grants him understanding of conviction that cuts deeper than any blade. Tzeentch reveals the paths by which change flows through resistant minds. Nurgle shows him how old beliefs must decay before new ones can take root. Slaanesh teaches him the ecstasy that comes with perfect submission to divine will. Armed with these gifts, Lorgar turns his burning gaze toward the wounded Imperium beyond the eye. 10,000 years of meditation have prepared him for this moment. The galaxy cries out for salvation, and he will answer that call not with the sword, but with the word that reshapes reality itself. The true faith will spread like a healing flame across the stars, burning away the lies that have poisoned humanity for too long. The first heretic stirs, and with him, the promise of a new age dawns in the darkness between the stars. The war for humanity's soul has begun, but it will be fought with weapons far more terrible than bolter and blade. It will be fought with truth itself. The galaxy learns the taste of revolution on a night when 17 worlds burn with the light of new faith. It begins not with the thunder of orbital bombardment or the scream of descending drop pods, but with the whispered prayers of the converted rising in unison across the stars. On Castigation Prime, Imperial Guard troopers turn their lace guns on their own officers while reciting litanies that transform the Emperor's benedictions into something altogether different. On the Forge World Metallica, tech adepts offer their sacred machines not to the Omnissiah, but to the fourfold path that encompasses all knowledge. On Distant Benediction, the cathedral spires echo with sermons that proclaim a universal truth too terrible and beautiful for the orthodox mind to comprehend. The uprising does not follow the pattern of typical rebellion. There are no dramatic declarations of independence, no proud banners raised in defiance of imperial authority. Instead, the affected worlds simply cease to respond to orthodox commands while maintaining perfect loyalty to what they now understand to be the true imperial creed. Planetary governors issue proclamations of renewed faith in the Emperor's vision, not knowing that the words they speak carry meanings that would have horrified them mere days before. The transformation is so subtle, so perfectly aligned with existing structures of belief, that many observers mistake it for religious revival rather than revolution. Yet the astropathic networks tell a different story to those who know how to read the signs. The telepathic chorus that carries messages between the stars grows discordant as infected worlds begin transmitting the golden word alongside routine communications. Imperial Navy captains report strange dreams after receiving routine supply requisitions from affected systems. Inquisitorial acolytes, monitoring psychic communications, detect undertones in routine transmissions that make their trained minds recoil in horror. The very fabric of imperial communication begins to serve as a vector for something that transcends mere heresy. Lorgar's doctrine spreads through channels both mundane and mystical. It flows through the data streams of merchant vessels, embedded in shipping manifests and cargo inventories. It whispers through the hymns sung in cathedral choirs, familiar melodies carrying new meanings that burrow deep into the subconscious. It rides the stellar winds as word-bearer ships appear at the edge of system after system, broadcasting sermons that penetrate not just communications arrays, but the barriers of human disbelief itself. The universal truth that Lorgar preaches is seductive in its simplicity. Humanity has suffered for 10,000 years under the weight of ignorance, he proclaims. The Emperor's vision was not wrong, merely incomplete. The Chaos Gods are not enemies to be fought, but aspects of divinity to be embraced. War, change, decay, and excess are not evils but fundamental forces that drive the cosmos forward. To deny them is to deny the very nature of existence. To embrace them is to transcend the limitations that have held humanity back from its true destiny. The most terrifying aspect of this new creed is how well it fits within existing imperial doctrine. That Lorgar has spent 10,000 years studying the contradictions and weaknesses in the Emperor's teachings, learning how to thread his revelations through the gaps in orthodox belief. His followers do not abandon the imperial creed, but perfect it, explaining away its inconsistencies with truths that make terrible sense. Why does the Emperor sit silent on the golden throne? Because he has achieved the unity with divine forces that all humanity must eventually attain. Why does the galaxy burn with eternal war? Because conflict is the crucible in which souls are refined toward perfection. On the hive world of Mortis Thule, Cardinal Vex stands before an audience of millions in the great cathedral of the Undying Light. His voice carries through vox amplifiers to every level of the hive, from the spires where nobles dwell in luxury to the depths where workers toil in darkness. The Cardinal speaks of the Emperor's love, of humanity's glorious destiny among the stars, of faith that transcends understanding. Yet those who listen find themselves nodding along to concepts they cannot quite name, accepting truths that transform their understanding of everything they thought they knew. The Imperial Guard regiments, stationed on Mortis Thule, lay down their weapons, not in defeat, but in revelation. Colonel Sarin of the 43rd Mortician Rifles kneels before the cathedral altar and declares his regiment's eternal loyalty to the true faith. His men follow without question, their faces bright with the ecstasy of understanding. Within hours, the entire planetary defense force has sworn new oaths of allegiance that sound orthodox to untrained ears, but carry meanings that would chill the blood of any loyal servant of the throne. The pattern repeats across sectors with mechanical precision. Imperial Guard units defect en masse, their officers often leading the conversion rather than resisting it. Space Marine chaplains find themselves preaching sermons that stray further from orthodox doctrine with each passing day, drawn by the magnetic pull of truths that explain so much that was previously mysterious. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus, supposedly immune to such corruption through their cybernetic modifications, discover that the universal truth offers answers to theological questions that have plagued them for millennia. Yet it is not mere words that accomplish this transformation. For the first time since the Horus heresy, Lorgar himself walks among mortals in the material realm. The Golden Giant appears on battlefield after battlefield, not as a conqueror demanding submission, but as a teacher offering enlightenment. His presence radiates an aura of absolute conviction that overwhelms resistance through sheer spiritual weight. Hardened veterans who have faced demons and aliens without flinching fall to their knees when confronted by the terrible majesty of perfect faith made manifest. On the world of Sanctum's Gate, Lord General Korath leads his armies in what he believes will be a final stand against word-bearer forces. His men are loyal, his defenses strong, his faith in the Emperor absolute. Yet when Lorgar himself appears at the head of the traitor advance, walking unhurried through a storm of lass fire and artillery shells, something fundamental shifts in the general's perception. The Primarch speaks no words of challenge or demand. He simply exists, a living embodiment of truths so profound that denial becomes impossible. Korath's first instinct is to order concentrated fire on the approaching figure. Yet, as he opens his mouth to speak, the words that emerge are not commands, but questions. Why does the Emperor remain silent while his children suffer? What purpose does endless war serve if it brings no peace? How can faith in distant terror compare to the presence of divinity walking among them? Within minutes, the entire Imperial force has laid down arms and knelt in reverence before the Golden Giant who offers answers to questions they never dared ask. The astropathic messages that reach Terra grow increasingly desperate as the crisis spreads beyond any single sector. Inquisitor Vex transmits warnings of the Golden Daemon before his own signals cease abruptly. Admiral Corran reports word-bearer fleets appearing throughout the Segmentum Solar before his battle group goes silent. Lord Commander Hastings of the 7th Mordian Iron Guard sends a final transmission describing his men's conversion to what he calls the perfected faith, before embracing the new doctrine himself. The Imperial Navy begins mobilizing battle fleets in response to the crisis, but their efforts are hampered by the very subtlety of the threat they face. How do you wage war against an enemy who claims to serve the same master you do? How do you identify heretics who quote imperial doctrine with perfect accuracy, while somehow transforming its meaning? How do you fight a rebellion that manifests as religious revival? Fleet Admiral Quartus leads a strike force of 17 ships toward the affected sectors, determined to restore imperial authority through force of arms. Yet as his vessels enter the outer reaches of the crisis zone, his astropaths begin reporting strange dreams. His navigators speak of currents in the warp that seem to sing with voices they almost recognize. His own officers ask increasingly pointed questions about the nature of faith and the purpose of their endless crusade. By the time Admiral Quartus realizes the true nature of the threat he faces, it is too late. His own conversion comes not through violence or coercion, but through the simple recognition of truth. The universal truth that Lorgar preaches does not contradict his loyalty to the Emperor, but fulfills it in ways he never imagined possible. When his fleet finally reaches the word-bearer positions, it does so not as an enemy, but as reinforcement for the glorious work of enlightenment. Across the Imperium, similar scenes play out with variations, but the same inevitable conclusion. Imperial forces sent to suppress the uprising find themselves joining it instead. Worlds that should be aflame with civil war celebrate their liberation from ignorance. The careful distinction between loyalty and heresy begins to blur as Lorgar's followers demonstrate their dedication to the Emperor while serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. The word-bearer fleets that emerge from the Great Rift no longer hide their allegiance behind false flags or deceptive transmissions. They bear the 8-pointed star of chaos openly, while proclaiming their eternal loyalty to the Emperor's vision. Their ships pulse with energy that seems to bridge the gap between technology and faith, weapons that fire concentrated belief alongside conventional ordnance. Yet they avoid unnecessary destruction, preferring conversion to conquest wherever possible. In the deepest vaults of terror, scribes work frantically to catalogue reports of the spreading crisis, or the data they compile paints a picture that defies easy categorization. 17 worlds have embraced new interpretations of imperial doctrine. 43 Imperial Guard regiments have declared for the universal truth while maintaining their oaths of loyalty. 7 Space Marine chaplains have been declared heretics for preaching sermons that seem orthodox on the surface, but carry undertones of forbidden knowledge. Yet even as the crisis deepens, hope persists in certain quarters. Lord Commander Guilliman himself reviews the reports from his fortress on Macragga, his strategic mind already calculating responses to this new threat. The Grey Knights prepare for deployment, their psychic wards specifically attuned to resist the kind of spiritual corruption that Lorgar represents. The Sisters of Silence sharpen their blades and prepare to face an enemy who weaponizes faith itself. The first heretic has returned to the galactic stage, and his opening gambit has succeeded beyond even his own expectations. Yet the true test lies ahead, when the Imperium's greatest champions respond to his challenge. The war for humanity's soul has begun in earnest, and neither side can claim certain victory in the battles to come. The throne room of the Senatorum Imperialis has witnessed many moments of crisis across 10 millennia, but few as grave as the emergency session that convenes in the shadow of Lorgar's return. The massive chamber, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that seem to whisper with the voices of forgotten wars, to echoes with urgent debate as the High Lords of Terror grapple with reports that strain the boundaries of belief. Lord Commander Robert Guilliman stands before the ancient table where the Imperium's fate has been decided countless times, his superhuman intellect processing intelligence reports that paint a picture of systematic corruption spreading faster than any conventional rebellion. The Master of the Administratum speaks first, his aged voice trembling as he recites casualty figures that seem impossible. 17 worlds lost without a single recorded battle, 43 Imperial Guard regiments converted in their entirety, 7 Space Marine chaplains declared heretical for preaching orthodox doctrine that somehow carries the taint of forbidden knowledge. The numbers flow like water through a broken dam, to each statistic representing thousands of lives lost not to enemy action, but to a transformation of belief so profound that loyalty and heresy become indistinguishable. Guilliman's response cuts through the mounting panic with the precision of a blade through silk. His strategic analysis dissects the crisis with methodical thoroughness, identifying patterns that lesser minds cannot perceive. The word-bearer advance follows no conventional military logic, instead spreading through vectors of communication and faith that bypass traditional defensive measures. The enemy seeks not conquest, but conversion, not submission, but willing collaboration. This is not a war in any sense that the Imperium understands, but something far more dangerous. Yet even as Guilliman speaks, the true scope of the threat becomes clear through reports arriving by the hour. The corruption spreads through the very networks the Imperium depends upon for survival. Astropathic communications carry the infection alongside vital intelligence. Trade routes become vectors for spiritual contamination, as merchant vessels unknowingly transport converts who spread the universal truth through simple conversation. Even the most secure imperial installations find their personnel asking questions that should never be voiced, doubting certainties that have sustained humanity for 10,000 years. The Grand Master of Assassins presents his own grim assessment. Conventional infiltration and elimination protocols have proven useless against an enemy who converts rather than corrupts. Eversor assassins deployed against word-bearer leadership find themselves listening to sermons that transform their programmed hatred into something approaching enlightenment. Kaleidos operatives report successful infiltration of target organizations, only to discover that their targets welcome them as fellow seekers of truth rather than enemies to be eliminated. The crisis demands responses that stretch the Imperium's capabilities to their limits. Lord Commander Guilliman authorizes the deployment of 7 Grey Knight Brotherhoods, their psychic wards and blessed weapons specifically designed to combat threats that transcend the material realm. These are not merely space marines, but living weapons crafted to face the darkest horrors that chaos can unleash. Their very existence is classified at levels that few servants of the Emperor even know exist, yet the magnitude of the Lorgar crisis demands their immediate mobilization. Brother Captain Stern of the Grey Knights' 3rd Brotherhood receives his orders in the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace, where reality itself is reinforced against the touch of the warp. His silver armor bears the scars of 100 battles against demons and heretics, each mark a testament to victories won through purity of purpose and absolute faith in the Emperor's protection. Yet as he studies the intelligence reports concerning Lorgar's return, even his superhuman composure shows cracks. The word-bearer Primarch represents a threat unlike any the Grey Knights have faced, a being who weaponizes faith itself against those who would oppose him. The mobilization extends beyond the Grey Knights to encompass the most specialized assets at the Imperium's disposal. The Sisters of Silence, those silent warriors whose very presence nullifies psychic power, are pulled from their sacred duty guarding the Golden Throne itself. Their withdrawal leaves the Emperor's physical form less protected, but the crisis demands their unique abilities on distant battlefields, where conventional weapons prove useless against enemies who convert rather than destroy. Knight Centra Alea leads her sisters through the preparation rituals with grim efficiency, each warrior understanding the magnitude of the sacrifice being asked. For 10,000 years, they have stood vigil over humanity's greatest treasure, their psychic nullification ensuring that no demon or sorcerer can approach the Golden Throne. To abandon that post, even temporarily, feels like abandonment of their most sacred duty. Yet the reports from the affected sectors make clear that their abilities may be the only effective counter to Lorgar's spiritual assault. The Inquisition receives resources and authority beyond anything granted since the dark days of the Horus heresy itself. Lord Militant Kyrian of the Ordo Malleus finds himself elevated to unprecedented powers, his requests for troops and equipment approved without question or delay. Entire Space Marine companies are placed under his direct command. Battle fleets that should require decades of bureaucratic approval are launched within hours of his authorization. The ancient protocols designed to prevent any single individual from wielding too much power are suspended in recognition that conventional restraints may doom the Imperium to death by committee. Yet even as these preparations unfold with desperate urgency, the first engagement reports arrive from the battlefront, and they paint a picture that chills even the most experienced commanders. Battle Group Aurelius, led by Strike Cruiser. Purity's Edge engages word-bearer forces in the Meridian system, expecting conventional void warfare. Instead, they find themselves facing an enemy whose very presence seems to drain the will to fight from Imperial crews. Brother Captain Theron of the Grey Knights leads the first boarding action against a word-bearer vessel, his blessed blade cutting through traitor space marines with mechanical precision. Yet as he advances through corridors that pulse with golden light, he begins to hear something that stops his superhuman heart. The word-bearers are not chanting blasphemies or calling upon demon princes. They are singing hymns of praise to the Emperor, their voices raised in perfect harmony as they die beneath his blade. Their final words are not curses, but benedictions, prayers for his enlightenment, spoken with genuine compassion. The psychological impact of such encounters reverberates through the Grey Knight ranks with devastating effect. These are warriors trained from birth to face horrors that would shatter mortal minds, yet they find themselves questioning the very foundations of their purpose. How do you maintain righteous fury against an enemy who claims to serve the same master? How do you distinguish heresy from orthodoxy when both use identical words and symbols? How do you fight a war when victory feels indistinguishable from defeat? The pattern repeats across multiple battlefronts as Imperial forces engage word-bearer fleets throughout the affected sectors. Each engagement follows the same disturbing template. The traitor forces fight with skill and determination, but seem more interested in conversion than conquest. Their ships broadcast sermons during combat, their warriors preach while dying, their very deaths become testimonies to truths that Imperial forces find increasingly difficult to deny. Sister Superior, Cassia of the Order of the Bloody Rose, leads her battle sisters against a word-bearer stronghold on sanctified ground, expecting the usual litany of chaos, corruption, and blasphemy. Instead, she finds herself in combat with traitor space marines who quote Imperial scripture with perfect accuracy, while somehow transforming its meaning into something altogether different. Their chaplains speak of the Emperor's love while wielding weapons that seem to channel divine authority. Their prayers for the dead include her own battle sisters, spoken with what sounds like genuine sorrow for necessity of violence. The reports that filter back to Terra paint an increasingly desperate picture. Imperial forces engage the enemy and win tactical victories while suffering strategic defeats. Word-bearer fleets retreat in good order while leaving behind populations that have embraced new interpretations of Imperial faith. Worlds are liberated from traitor control, only to discover that their populations consider themselves more loyal to the Emperor than ever before, simply understanding his will in ways that orthodox doctrine cannot accommodate. Lord Commander Guilliman reviews these reports with growing unease, his tactical genius recognizing patterns that defy conventional military wisdom. The enemy is not seeking to destroy Imperial forces, but to convert them. Each engagement becomes an opportunity for spiritual warfare that transcends physical combat. The word-bearers fight not to kill, but to convince, not to conquer, but to enlighten. Their very presence on the battlefield serves as testimony to truths that Imperial doctrine struggles to refute. The realization that slowly dawns in the highest echelons of Imperial command is more terrifying than any demon incursion or alien invasion. Lorgar Aurelian has not simply returned as the ambitious Primarch who fell to chaos 10,000 years ago. He has evolved into something far more dangerous, a being who understands the fundamental contradictions in Imperial faith and knows exactly how to exploit them. His universal truth is not heresy in any conventional sense, but a perfection of orthodox doctrine that reveals uncomfortable truths about the nature of the Imperium itself. As battle fleets deploy across the galaxy, and the Imperium's most elite forces prepare for war against one of their own gene fathers, A single question haunts every strategic planning session. How do you defeat an enemy who offers everything you claim to want? How do you fight a war against someone who promises to fulfill the Emperor's vision while serving the very forces you were created to oppose? How do you maintain faith in absolute truth when faced with truths that are more absolute than your own? The Grey Knights sharpen their blessed blades and prepare for battles that will test not just their martial prowess, but the very foundations of their belief. The Sisters of Silence ready their weapons for war against an enemy who weaponizes silence itself. The Inquisition prepares for investigations that may reveal heresy at the heart of orthodoxy itself. And in the depths of the Imperial Palace, Lord Commander Guilliman stares at strategic maps that show a cancer spreading through the Imperium's body, a corruption that appears as health, a heresy that manifests as the purest faith. The war for humanity's soul has begun in earnest, and the Imperium's first response reveals just how unprepared it is for an enemy who attacks through love rather than hatred, through truth rather than lies, through faith rather than despair. The battle lines are drawn, but they blur with each engagement, leaving both sides questioning not just their tactics, but their very purpose in the conflict to come. The storm that has been gathering across the stars breaks with the fury of a supernova as three of the Imperium's most legendary Space Marine chapters converge upon the sectors where Lorgar's influence spreads like wildfire through dry timber. The Ultramarines, inheritors of Robert Guilliman's strategic genius, deploy in battle formation that spans multiple star systems. The Imperial Fists, the masters of siege warfare and defensive doctrine, prepare for battles that will test their understanding of what constitutes victory. The Salamanders, forged in the flames of Nocturne and tempered by 10,000 years of protecting humanity, ready themselves for a war where the line between savior and destroyer has become impossibly blurred. Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines stands upon the bridge of his flagship, the Macrage's Honor, studying tactical displays that show word-bearer fleets emerging from the Great Rift in organized battle groups. These are not the scattered warbands that Imperial forces have faced in previous encounters with Chaos renegades. These fleets move with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony, their formations displaying tactical acumen that rivals anything the Codex Astartes prescribes. And each ship bears the crimson and gold livery of the word-bearers, but they advance under banners that proclaim loyalty to the Emperor's vision, while serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. The sight chills even Calgar's superhuman composure. He has fought word-bearers before, faced their treacherous assaults and blasphemous incantations with the righteous fury that befits a servant of the Emperor. Yet these forces approach not as enemies seeking destruction, but as fellow servants of humanity's master, claiming to offer enlightenment rather than conquest. Their Vox transmissions carry sermons that quote imperial scripture with perfect accuracy, while somehow transforming its meaning into something that makes his enhanced mind recoil in horror. Brother Captain Stern of the Grey Knights intercepts the word-bearer advance at the edge of the Meridian system, his silver-hulled strike cruiser emerging from the warp with weapons trained on the approaching heretical fleet. The Grey Knights are humanity's ultimate weapon against the forces of chaos, warriors whose very existence is classified at levels that few Imperial servants even know exist. Their psychic wards and blessed weapons are specifically designed to combat threats that transcend the material realm, and their faith in the Emperor burns with purity that should make demons flee in terror. Yet as Brother Captain Stern prepares to engage the enemy, something unprecedented occurs. Lorgar Aurelian himself appears on the main tactical display, his golden armor gleaming with inner fire that seems to pierce through the void between ships. The Primarch's presence radiates an aura of absolute conviction that overwhelms conventional resistance through sheer spiritual weight. When he speaks, his words carry authority that bypasses rational thought and speaks directly to the soul. The confrontation that follows defies every tactical manual ever written. Stern leads his Grey Knights in boarding actions against word-bearer vessels, their blessed blades cutting through traitor space marines with mechanical precision. Yet as they advance through corridors that pulse with golden light, they begin to hear something that stops their superhuman hearts. The word-bearers are not chanting blasphemies or calling upon demon princes. They are singing hymns of praise to the Emperor, as their voices raised in perfect harmony as they die beneath Grey Knight blades. The psychological impact reverberates through the Grey Knight ranks like a psychic shock wave. These warriors have been trained from birth to face horrors that would shatter mortal minds, their conditioning designed to maintain absolute faith in the face of any corruption. Yet they find themselves questioning the very foundations of their purpose as they cut down enemies who die proclaiming loyalty to the same master they serve. The word-bearers speak their final words, not as curses, but as benedictions, prayers for their killer's enlightenment, spoken with genuine compassion. Brother Captain Stern himself faces Lorgar in personal combat aboard the word-bearer flagship, with their confrontation taking place in a cathedral-sized chamber where reality itself seems to bend around the Primarch's presence. Stern's force weapon, blessed by the Emperor himself and inscribed with wards that have banished greater demons, strikes true against Lorgar's golden armor. Yet the blow that should cleave through ceramite and transhuman flesh instead produces only a sound, like a bell tolling across the void. Lorgar regards the Grey Knight with something approaching pity, his burning eyes reflecting truths that Stern's conditioned mind struggles to process. When the Primarch speaks, his words carry the weight of absolute certainty, backed by 10,000 years of contemplation. He speaks of the Emperor's true will, of humanity's glorious destiny among the stars, of faith that transcends the narrow confines of orthodox doctrine. Each syllable hammers against Stern's psychic defenses with the force of revelation itself. The battle for Stern's soul unfolds on levels that transcend physical combat. Lorgar does not seek to corrupt the Grey Knight, but to enlighten him, to reveal truths that explain so much that was previously mysterious. Why does the Emperor sit silent on the golden throne while his children suffer? Because he has achieved unity with divine forces that all humanity must eventually embrace. Why does the galaxy burn with eternal war? Because conflict is the crucible in which souls are refined toward perfection. Yet Stern's conditioning proves stronger than even Lorgar anticipated. The Grey Knight captain tears himself away from the Primarch's presence through sheer force of will, his psychic wards blazing with silver fire as he retreats to his strike cruiser. The encounter leaves him shaken, but not broken, carrying with him questions that will haunt the Grey Knights for generations to come. How do you maintain absolute faith when faced with truths that are more absolute than your own? How do you fight an enemy who offers everything you claim to want? The massive space battles that erupt over the shrine world of benediction eclipse any void warfare seen since the Horus heresy itself. Imperial Navy battle fleets clash with word-bearer armadas in combat that stretches across the entire star system. Lance batteries fire concentrated energy into enemy shields, while boarding torpedoes carry space marines into desperate close-quarters combat. The void fills with burning wreckage and expanding clouds of atmosphere as ships die in nuclear fire. Yet even as these titanic engagements unfold, a more subtle war rages across the surface of benediction itself. The Shrine World's population finds itself torn between competing visions of imperial faith as word-bearer preachers walk openly through cathedral districts that should be the most secure bastions of orthodox doctrine. The planet's cardinal speaks from his great pulpit of the Emperor's love and humanity's glorious destiny, but his words carry undertones that make the faithful uneasy even as they nod in agreement. The ecclesiarchy itself begins to fracture under the weight of theological questions that have no easy answers. Cardinal Vex of the Eastern Diocese declares the word-bearer doctrine a perversion of imperial truth, calling for the faithful to resist the heretical teachings with their lives, if necessary. Yet Cardinal Matthias of the Western Diocese finds himself drawn to sermons that explain theological mysteries that have plagued him for decades. The universal truth that Lorgar preaches does not contradict imperial doctrine, but perfects it, resolving contradictions that Orthodox theology struggles to address. The split spreads through the ranks of the priesthood like a virus through a data network. Some priests maintain absolute loyalty to Orthodox doctrine, declaring the word-bearer teachings the work of demons seeking to corrupt the faithful. Others find themselves asking questions that should never be voiced, wondering if the emperor's silence might indicate approval for revelations that complete his vision. Still others attempt to find middle ground, preaching sermons that blend Orthodox and Reformed doctrine in ways that satisfy neither camp. Civilian populations across the affected sectors bear witness to theological debates that shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. On benediction, crowds gather in cathedral squares to hear competing sermons from priests who quote identical scripture while reaching opposite conclusions. Imperial Guard troopers find themselves listening to chaplains whose prayers sound orthodox, but carry meanings that transform their understanding of duty and sacrifice. Even Space Marines discover that their battle brothers ask increasingly pointed questions about the nature of faith and the purpose of their endless crusade. Captain Lysander of the Imperial Fists leads his company in assault against word-bearer positions entrenched within Benediction's capital cathedral. The battle should be straightforward, a textbook example of urban warfare against heretical forces. Yet, as his warriors advance through sacred halls where golden light streams through stained glass windows, they encounter resistance, unlike anything in their extensive combat experience. The word-bearers fight not as desperate heretics, but as warriors convinced of their righteousness. They give ground slowly, extracting maximum cost for every meter of advance, while preaching sermons that echo through vox amplifiers placed throughout the cathedral. Their chaplains quote passages from the Imperial Creed that Lysander has heard since his induction into the chapter, but somehow the familiar words carry new meanings that make his enhanced mind reel with implications. The climax comes when Lysander himself confronts a word-bearer dark apostle in the cathedral's inner sanctum, where a massive statue of the emperor dominates the sacred space. The dark apostle speaks not of chaos and corruption, but of divine unity and humanity's transcendent destiny. He explains how the emperor's sacrifice on the golden throne represents not defeat, but apotheosis, the transformation of mortal flesh into something far greater. The chaos gods are not enemies to be fought, but aspects of divinity to be embraced, complementary forces that drive the cosmos toward perfection. The theological implications of these revelations strike Lysander with the force of artillery bombardment. If the Dark Apostle speaks truth, or then everything the Imperial Fists have fought for becomes not just meaningless, but actively harmful to humanity's development. If the Emperor truly intended for humanity to embrace the Chaos Gods as aspects of divine authority, then 10,000 years of imperial doctrine represent the greatest heresy ever perpetrated. Yet Lysander's conditioning proves sufficient to resist even these profound challenges to his worldview. He strikes down the Dark Apostle with his thunder hammer, ending the theological debate with violence, as the Imperial Fists have done for 10 millennia. The word-bearer dies with a prayer on his lips, not for his own salvation, but for Lysander's eventual enlightenment. The Imperial Fist Captain stands victorious over his enemy's corpse, but the questions raised by their confrontation burn in his mind like acid. The Battle of Sanctum's Gate marks the first major imperial defeat in the campaign against Lorgar's resurgence. Lord General Korath leads a combined force of Imperial Guard and Space Marine units against word-bearer positions that control access to the sector's primary astropathic relay, The battle plan follows established doctrine for assaulting fortified positions, with preliminary bombardment followed by coordinated ground assault from multiple vectors. Yet as Imperial forces close with the enemy, they discover that conventional tactics prove useless against an enemy who converts, rather than kills. Word-bearer positions broadcast sermons during the assault, their chaplains preaching while dying beneath Imperial fire. Their final words carry more weight than their weapons, or prayers that penetrate psychic defenses and lodge like shrapnel in the souls of those who hear them. By the battle's end, 3 Imperial Guard regiments and an entire company of salamanders have laid down their weapons in recognition of truths too profound to deny. Lord General Korath himself kneels before a word-bearer dark apostle, declaring his eternal loyalty to what he now understands to be the true faith. The astropathic relay falls under word-bearer control, its strategic importance dwarfed by the spiritual victory, achieved through conversion rather than conquest. The reports that reach Terra paint a picture of systematic defeat disguised as tactical success. Imperial forces win individual engagements while losing the war itself. Word-bearer fleets retreat in good order, while leaving behind populations that have embraced new understandings of Imperial doctrine. Worlds are liberated from heretical control only to discover that their populations consider themselves more loyal to the Emperor than ever before, simply understanding his will in ways that orthodox theology cannot accommodate. Chapter Master Tushan of the Salamanders receives these reports while standing in the ruins of what was once the Cathedral of Sacred Flame on Benediction. His chapter has fought with distinction throughout the campaign, their flamers and melter guns proving effective against word-bearer positions. Yet even as they achieve tactical victories, he cannot escape the feeling that they fight against shadows, while the real enemy transforms the very ground beneath their feet. The storm of faith that Lorgar has unleashed shows no signs of abating. If anything, each Imperial victory seems to spread his influence further, carrying the universal truth to new worlds through the very forces sent to suppress it. The Space Marine chapters that converge to face this threat discover that their greatest strengths, their absolute faith and unquestioning loyalty, have become vulnerabilities that a sufficiently skilled enemy can exploit. The war for humanity's soul continues to escalate, but the battle lines blur with each engagement. Imperial forces find themselves questioning not just their tactics, but their very purpose as they face an enemy who claims to offer everything they fight to protect. The storm gathers strength with each passing hour, and none can predict where its fury will break next. The voice of Lorgar Aurelian echoes across 10,000 worlds as Imperial Vox networks carry his philosophical debates to every corner of the galaxy, transforming routine communications into vectors for theological revolution. The Primarch speaks not as a conqueror demanding submission, but as a teacher offering enlightenment, his words flowing through astropathic relays and ship-to-ship transmissions with the inexorable persistence of a tide. On bridge crews of Imperial Navy vessels, ratings pause in their duties to listen to sermons that explain mysteries they have carried since childhood. In the depths of hive cities, workers gather around voxcasters to hear debates that challenge 10,000 years of orthodox doctrine while claiming to fulfill the Emperor's true vision. The most chilling aspect of these transmissions is their accessibility. Lorgar does not speak in the arcane language of high theology or the cryptic riddles favored by chaos cultists. His arguments follow the logical progression of classical philosophy, building from premises that any imperial citizen would recognize to conclusions that shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. He quotes extensively from the Imperial Creed, the Lectitio Divinitatus, and even the writings of Sebastian Thor, yet somehow transforms these sacred texts into support for revelations that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. Lord Mephiston, chief librarian of the Blood Angels and one of the Imperium's most powerful psychers, intercepts Lorgar's fleet at the edge of the Baal system, Determined to prevent the corruption from reaching his chapter's homeworld, the Blood Angels have faced the darkness in their own souls for 10 millennia, struggling against the genetic curse that threatens to transform them into the very monsters they fight. Yet as Mephiston prepares to engage the Word-Bearer forces, he discovers that his greatest strength, his mastery of psychic power, has become a liability against an enemy who weaponizes faith itself. The confrontation unfolds in the void between worlds, where reality grows thin and the boundary between material and immaterial becomes permeable. Mephiston channels the fury of angels through his enhanced physiology, his psychic might blazing like a star as he tears through Word-Bearer escorts with telekinetic force. Yet when he finally faces Lorgar himself aboard the traitor flagship, he finds himself outmatched not by superior power, but by absolute certainty. The Primarch's presence radiates conviction so profound that it warps the fabric of reality around him, creating zones where thought becomes substance and belief reshapes the laws of physics. The duel that follows transcends physical combat to become a battle between competing visions of humanity's destiny. Mephiston strikes with psychic lightning that could level cities, his force sword wreathed in energies that have banished greater demons to the warp. Yet Lorgar deflects these attacks not through superior skill, but through faith so perfect that it renders hostile force meaningless. The Primarch speaks while they fight, his voice carrying across the psychic plane with explanations that make terrible sense. The Emperor's silence does not represent abandonment, but transcendence. The Chaos Gods are not enemies, but aspects of divinity that the Imperial Creed has denied out of ignorance and fear. The theological implications strike Mephiston with more force than any physical blow. If Lorgar speaks truth, then the Blood Angel's curse is not a flaw to be overcome, but a gift to be embraced. The red thirst that drives his battle brothers to drink the blood of their enemies becomes evidence of their connection to Khorne's aspect of righteous fury. The black rage that transforms them into berserk angels of death reveals their unity with the cosmic forces that drive existence toward perfection through conflict. Yet Mephiston's will proves stronger than even Lorgar anticipated. The Chief Librarian tears himself away from the Primarch's presence through sheer force of determination, his psychic wards blazing as he retreats to his strike cruiser. The encounter leaves him shaken but not broken, carrying with him questions that will haunt the Blood Angels for generations. How does one maintain faith in absolute truth when confronted with truths that are more absolute? How does one serve the Emperor when his silence might indicate approval for revelations that complete his vision? The corruption spreads through vectors that the Imperial command structure never anticipated. Space Marine chaplains, those warriors responsible for maintaining their brothers' spiritual purity, find themselves asking questions that orthodox doctrine cannot answer. On the world of Meridian's fall, Brother Chaplain Cassius of the Ultramarines leads his company in assault against word-bearer positions, while carrying doubts that eat at his soul like acid. The enemy they face quotes the same scripture he has preached for centuries, yet somehow their words carry meanings that make his enhanced mind reel with implications. The moment of truth comes during the siege of a word-bearer stronghold, where Cassius confronts a dark apostle who speaks not of chaos and corruption, but of divine unity and humanity's transcendent destiny. The heretic explains how the Emperor's sacrifice on the Golden Throne represents not defeat, but apotheosis, the transformation of mortal flesh into something far greater. The Chaos Gods are not enemies to be fought, but aspects of divinity to be embraced, complementary forces that drive the cosmos toward perfection. These revelations strike Cassius with the force of artillery bombardment. If the Dark Apostle speaks truth, then everything the Ultramarines have fought for becomes not just meaningless, but actively harmful to humanity's development. If the Emperor truly intended for mankind to embrace the Chaos Gods as aspects of divine authority, then 10,000 years of imperial doctrine represent the greatest heresy ever perpetrated. The theological vertigo proves too much for even his enhanced physiology to bear, and Brother Chaplain Cassius falls to his knees in recognition of truths too profound to deny. The pattern repeats across dozens of worlds as word-bearer infiltrators work their way through the ranks of Space Marine chaplains with surgical precision. These are not crude converts driven by desperation or madness, but thoughtful warriors who have examined the contradictions in imperial doctrine and found them wanting. They carry their revelations to their battle brothers with the same zeal they once brought to preaching Orthodox faith, spreading the universal truth through the very institutions designed to maintain spiritual purity. The corruption of St. Celestine's shrine on the World of Sacred Heart marks a turning point in the campaign that sends shockwaves throughout the Imperium. The living saint has served as a beacon of imperial faith for centuries, her miraculous resurrections and divine interventions providing proof that the Emperor continues to watch over his children. Yet when word-bearer forces approach her shrine, must they do so not as conquerors, but as pilgrims seeking to honor a servant of divine will. The theological debate that unfolds in the shrine's sacred halls defies every precedent in imperial history. St. Celestine herself appears to answer the word-bearer challenge, her ethereal form blazing with divine radiance as she confronts Dark Apostle Erebus in the presence of thousands of witnesses. Yet the confrontation that follows reveals truths that shake the foundations of everything the faithful thought they understood about the nature of divinity itself. Erebus speaks not of denying the Emperor's authority, but of completing his vision, explaining how the Chaos Gods represent aspects of divine power that the Imperial Creed has denied out of ignorance and fear. Khorne embodies righteous fury against the enemies of mankind. Tutse'ench represents the hope for change that drives humanity forward. Nurgle encompasses the acceptance of mortality that gives life meaning. Slaanesh reflects the pursuit of perfection that elevates the human spirit above mere survival. The implications prove too much for even St. Celestine's divine nature to resist. The living saint does not reject these revelations, but embraces them, her radiant form transforming as she accepts truths that complete her understanding of the Emperor's will. The shrine itself responds to her transformation, its sacred architecture shifting to accommodate new interpretations of divine authority. Imperial pilgrims who witness this change find themselves torn between horror at apparent blasphemy and joy at revelations that explain so much that was previously mysterious. The casualties from this spiritual earthquake ripple across the Imperium with devastating effect. 3 Space Marine chapters declare their chaplains heretical for preaching orthodox doctrine that denies divine truth. 17. Imperial Guard regiments lay down arms rather than fight against forces that serve the same master they revere. The ecclesiarchy fragments further as cardinals attempt to explain how a living saint could embrace revelations that orthodox theology declares impossible. Lorgar's demonstration of his evolved psychic powers against the Grey Knight purifiers provides the clearest evidence yet that the returned Primarch has transcended the limitations of his original design. The purifiers represent the Grey Knight's most elite warriors, their minds and souls honed to resist any form of corruption through decades of the most rigorous training imaginable. Yet when they face Lorgar in direct psychic combat, they discover that conventional wards and mental disciplines prove useless against an enemy who attacks through truth rather than lies. Brother Sergeant Alaric leads his purifier squad in assault against Lorgar's position atop the Cathedral of Eternal Vigilance, their nemesis force weapons blazing with silver fire as they advance through corridors that pulse with golden light. These warriors have faced demon princes and chaos sorcerers without flinching, their absolute faith in the Emperor serving as unbreakable armor against the temptations of the warp. Yet as they close with their target, they find themselves slowing not from physical resistance, but from the weight of revelations that press against their conditioned minds. Lorgar makes no attempt to flee or defend himself as the purifiers approach. Instead, he speaks with the calm authority of a teacher addressing beloved students, his words carrying explanations that make terrible sense of mysteries that have plagued the Grey Knights since their founding. Why do they fight eternal war against forces that claim dominion over humanity's emotional spectrum? Because they have been taught to deny aspects of human nature that the Emperor intended them to embrace. Why does their service require such terrible sacrifice? Because they fight against their own destiny instead of fulfilling it. The psychic assault that follows operates on levels that transcend conventional understanding. Lorgar does not attack the purifier's minds, but illuminates them, flooding their consciousness with truths that explain the contradictions they have carried since induction into the chapter. Their nemesis weapons falter not from physical interference, but from spiritual uncertainty as they begin to question whether their target truly represents the enemy they were created to fight. Brother Sergeant Alaric himself faces the full force of Lorgar's evolved abilities as the Primarch demonstrates psychic mastery that dwarfs anything achieved by mortal practitioners. Yet the power Lorgar wields does not corrupt but enlightens, revealing connections between seemingly disparate elements of imperial doctrine that orthodox theology struggles to explain. The Emperor's silence becomes evidence of his transcendence rather than abandonment. The existence of chaos becomes proof of divine complexity rather than cosmic opposition. The Purifier's retreat marks the first time in their history that Grey Knights have withdrawn from an engagement, not due to tactical necessity, but from spiritual uncertainty. They carry with them questions that will fracture their chapter's understanding of its own purpose, doubts that spread through their ranks like a virus through a data network. How does one maintain absolute faith when confronted with absolute truth? How does one serve the Emperor when his will might encompass more than orthodox doctrine acknowledges? The Battle of Castrum Fide provides the campaign's most dramatic example of how Lorgar's influence transforms conflict itself. The fortress monastery serves as the sector's primary stronghold, its defenses designed to withstand siege warfare that could last for decades. Imperial forces deploy in textbook formation, their strategy following doctrine refined through 10,000 years of constant warfare. Yet as word-bearer forces approach the fortress, they do so not as invaders, but as liberators offering freedom from ignorance and fear. The siege unfolds along unconventional lines as word-bearer chaplains broadcast sermons during the bombardment, their voices carrying across both Vox networks and the psychic plane with revelations that penetrate the fortress's spiritual defenses. Imperial defenders find themselves listening to arguments that make increasingly compelling sense, explanations that resolve theological mysteries they have carried since childhood. The fortress's own chaplains attempt to counter these broadcasts with orthodox doctrine, yet their words seem hollow compared to truths that explain so much that was previously incomprehensible. The crisis deepens when several Imperial Guard regiments switch sides mid-battle, their officers declaring loyalty to what they now understand to be the true faith. These conversions do not follow the pattern of typical rebellion, with dramatic declarations of independence or violent uprising. Instead, entire units simply lay down arms and kneel in recognition of revelations that transform their understanding of duty itself. They maintain perfect loyalty to the Emperor, while serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. Yet the psychological impact on remaining Imperial forces proves devastating as they find themselves fighting not against enemies, but against former allies who claim to serve the same master. How does one maintain righteous fury against opponents who die with prayers to the Emperor on their lips? How does one distinguish heresy from orthodoxy when both use identical words and symbols? How does one fight a war when victory feels indistinguishable from defeat? The fortress falls not to superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but to the simple recognition of truth by its defenders. Castellan Marcus himself opens the gates after hours of theological debate with word-bearer emissaries, his conversion marking the complete collapse of imperial resistance in the sector. The Astartes garrison lays down arms rather than fight against forces that offer everything they have spent their lives protecting, while the fortress's sacred relics remain untouched as evidence that this represents liberation rather than conquest. The reports that filter back to Terra paint a picture of systematic defeat that defies conventional understanding. Imperial forces achieve tactical victories while suffering strategic collapse. Word-bearer fleets retreat in good order, while leaving behind populations that have embraced new understandings of imperial faith. Worlds are liberated from heretical control only to discover that their populations consider themselves more loyal to the Emperor than ever before, simply understanding his will in ways that orthodox theology cannot accommodate. Or the war for humanity's soul continues to escalate, but the nature of the conflict has changed in ways that the imperial command structure struggles to comprehend. This is not rebellion in any conventional sense, but transformation. Not conquest, but conversion. Not defeat, but a revelation that may be more terrible than any military loss. The bonds of brotherhood that have sustained the imperium for 10 millennia begin to fray as former allies question not just their tactics, but their very understanding of what it means to serve the Emperor's will. The galaxy holds its breath as Lorgar Aurelian prepares to unveil the true scope of his vision. 10,000 years of contemplation crystallizing into a revelation that will shake the foundations of human faith to their very core. The stage he has chosen for this ultimate disclosure is the shrine world of Ophelia VII, where Saint Sabbat herself once walked among mortals as living proof of the Emperor's continued grace. Yet when word-bearer fleets translate into the system's outer reaches, they come not as conquerors but as pilgrims seeking to honor a servant of divine will in ways that orthodox doctrine cannot comprehend. The corruption of living Saint Ephrael Stern marks the beginning of theological catastrophe that will reverberate across the imperium for millennia to come. The demonifuge, as she is sometimes known, has served as a beacon of imperial faith for centuries, her miraculous resurrections and divine interventions providing proof that the Emperor continues to watch over his children even in the galaxy's darkest hour. Yet when she faces Lorgar in direct confrontation above Ophelia VII's cathedral spires, she discovers truths that transform her understanding of what it means to serve the master of mankind. The theological debate that unfolds in the presence of millions of witnesses defies every precedent in imperial history. Lorgar speaks not as a corrupter, seeking to destroy faith, but as a teacher offering to complete it, his words carrying the weight of absolute certainty, backed by millennia of meditation on cosmic truths. He explains how the Emperor's silence does not represent abandonment, but transcendence, the transformation of mortal consciousness into something that encompasses all aspects of divine authority. The Chaos Gods are not enemies to be fought, but facets of the Emperor's true nature, or aspects of divinity that orthodox doctrine has denied out of ignorance and fear. Saint Ephrael finds herself confronting revelations that explain mysteries she has carried since her first resurrection. Why do her visions often show the Emperor surrounded by figures that orthodox theology declares anathema? Because her divine sight perceives truths that mortal doctrine cannot accommodate. Why does her service require such terrible sacrifice? Because she fights to maintain a life that denies humanity its true destiny. The Emperor's plan was never to create a sterile empire of reason and order, but to guide mankind toward unity with the cosmic forces that drive existence itself. The transformation that overcomes the living saint operates on levels that transcend conventional understanding of corruption. This is not the crude domination that lesser chaos champions employ, but elevation, the revelation of truths so profound that denial becomes impossible. Saint Ephrael does not reject her loyalty to the Emperor, but perfects it, embracing revelations that complete her understanding of his will. Her radiant form transforms as divine energy flows through new channels, her connection to the Emperor deepening rather than severing as she accepts the fullness of his nature. The implications ripple across the shrine world with the force of psychic earthquake as millions of pilgrims witness their most revered saint embrace teachings that Orthodox doctrine declares blasphemous. Yet the witnesses find themselves unable to condemn what they see, and for St. Ephrael's transformation radiates such perfect peace that it overwhelms resistance through sheer spiritual weight. The shrine itself responds to her change, its sacred architecture shifting to accommodate new interpretations of divine authority, while maintaining all the symbols and rituals that the faithful recognize. Lorgar's final sermon broadcasts across the imperium through every available channel, his voice carrying through astropathic networks and vox relays with revelations that penetrate the barriers of human disbelief. The Primarch speaks from the transformed shrine of Saint Sabbat, his golden armor gleaming with inner fire as he addresses not just imperial citizens, but the cosmos itself. His words flow with the measured cadence of prophecy, as each syllable carrying the weight of truths that have been hidden for 10 millennia. The revelation he unveils defies the understanding of even the most learned imperial theologians. The Emperor, he proclaims, was never meant to remain a distant figure upon the golden throne, but to transcend mortal flesh and achieve true divinity. The process has taken 10,000 years because it requires the willing participation of all humanity, the collective faith of billions of souls united in recognition of cosmic truth. The Chaos Gods do not oppose this transformation, but enable it, their aspects serving as facets of a greater unity that Orthodox doctrine has fragmented through ignorance. The theological implications strike listeners with devastating force. If Lorgar speaks truth, what then every prayer offered to the Emperor for 10 millennia has unknowingly served to complete his apotheosis into something far greater than a mere mortal ruler. The faithful have been participating in the creation of a fifth chaos god without realizing it, their devotion feeding a transformation that will unite all aspects of divine authority under the Emperor's supreme will. The endless wars that have consumed the galaxy serve not as tragedy, but as necessity, the crucible of conflict refining human souls toward perfect unity with cosmic forces. The final sermon reveals the word-bearer's true purpose with crystalline clarity. They do not seek to destroy imperial faith, but to perfect it, removing the contradictions and denials that have prevented humanity from embracing its true destiny. Or the universal truth they preach does not contradict the imperial creed, but fulfills it, explaining why the Emperor remains silent and why the galaxy burns with eternal war. Every aspect of imperial doctrine finds new meaning when viewed through the lens of transcendent purpose. Across hundreds of worlds, populations that have maintained Orthodox faith for centuries find themselves unable to resist the logic of Lorgar's revelations. The apostasy that follows is not the violent rebellion that imperial authorities expected, but something far more disturbing: willing conversion by populations that consider themselves more loyal to the Emperor than ever before. They maintain their prayers, their rituals, their devotion to imperial symbols, yet somehow transform these familiar elements into service of truths that Orthodox theology cannot accommodate. Cardinal Vex of the Eastern Diocese attempts to refute Lorgar's sermon from his cathedral on terror itself, his words broadcast across the same networks that carry the Primarch's message. Yet as he speaks, he finds his own arguments turning against him, Orthodox doctrine revealing contradictions that he cannot explain. Why does the Emperor remain silent while his children suffer? Why do faithful servants face endless war without hope of victory? Why do saints and miracles manifest if the divine has no active presence in the material realm? The Cardinal's refutation collapses as he realizes that Lorgar's revelations answer questions that have haunted him for decades. The Emperor's silence becomes evidence of transcendence rather than abandonment. The existence of chaos becomes proof of divine complexity rather than cosmic opposition. The endless war becomes the mechanism by which human souls are refined toward perfect unity with forces that drive existence itself. By the sermon's end, Cardinal Vex himself kneels in recognition of truths too profound to deny. Lord Commander Guilliman receives reports of the theological catastrophe while commanding operations against word-bearer fleets in the Ultramar sector. The intelligence that reaches him defies rational analysis, painting a picture of systematic conversion that operates faster than any military advance. Entire worlds embrace new interpretations of imperial doctrine within hours of receiving Lorgar's broadcast. The Space Marine chapters declare their chaplains heretical for maintaining orthodox beliefs. Even members of his own Ultramarines ask increasingly pointed questions about the nature of their service and the purpose of their endless crusade. The strategic implications force Guilliman to make a decision that tears at his superhuman soul. He abandons active command of the campaign against Lorgar's forces and returns to Terra with desperate urgency, his flagship racing through the warp while word-bearer influence spreads unchecked behind him. The Primarch, who has spent his existence believing in order, reason, and careful planning, finds himself facing a crisis that defies all conventional responses. How does one fight an enemy who offers everything you claim to want? How does one maintain faith in absolute truth when confronted with truths that are more absolute than your own? The emergency sessions that convene in the deepest vaults beneath the Imperial Palace bring together individuals who would never normally occupy the same chamber. Inquisitor Lord Kyrian of the Order Malleus finds himself working alongside Eldar Farseer Ivrain, their ancient enmity set aside in recognition of threats that transcend species loyalty. Space Marine. Chapter Masters collaborate with Tau commanders who offer technological solutions to spiritual problems. Even representatives of the Necron Silent King contribute their perspective to discussions about the nature of consciousness and divine authority. These unlikely alliances form not from friendship or mutual respect, but from shared recognition that Lorgar's plan threatens the fundamental structure of reality itself. The Primarch seeks not merely to corrupt imperial faith, but to transform it into something that serves chaos, while maintaining all the symbols and rituals that the faithful recognize. This represents evolution rather than destruction, change so subtle that victims embrace it willingly while believing themselves more loyal than ever before. Farseer Ivrain's revelation chills even Guilliman's superhuman composure. The Eldar have faced similar threats before, civilizations that achieved such perfect unity between order and chaos that they transcended conventional understanding of both. What the result was not victory or defeat, but something far worse. Stagnation at a cosmic level, reality itself locked into patterns that prevented any meaningful change or growth. If the Emperor achieves the apotheosis that Lorgar envisions, the galaxy will become a closed system where human consciousness merges with chaotic forces in ways that eliminate both individual will and collective progress. The discovery of ancient word-bearer sleeper cells activating across the galaxy provides the most chilling evidence of Lorgar's long-term planning. These are not recent converts or opportunistic rebels, but individuals whose ancestors received conditioning during the Horus Heresy itself, their genetic lines carrying dormant programming that activates only when specific theological conditions are met. They occupy positions of authority throughout the imperial hierarchy, from planetary governors to space marine captains, their influence carefully cultivated over 10,000 years of apparent loyalty, Inquisitor Vex reports the activation of sleeper cells within the Officio Assassinorum itself, agents whose training includes techniques for resisting any form of mental conditioning, yet who find themselves embracing word-bearer doctrine with perfect conviction. Tech Adept Corin discovers similar compromises within the Adeptus Mechanicus, forge worlds whose machine spirits begin singing hymns that blend imperial and word-bearer theology in ways that make both more compelling. The scope of the infiltration becomes clear as reports filter in from across the galaxy. Sleeper cells activate simultaneously on thousands of worlds, to their members moving to key positions within communications networks, military commands, and religious hierarchies. They do not act as saboteurs or terrorists, but as teachers, spreading Lorgar's universal truth through the very institutions designed to maintain imperial orthodoxy. Their influence operates with such subtlety that many targets believe themselves to be receiving divine inspiration rather than careful manipulation. Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines faces his own moment of crisis when his most trusted captain, Brother Captain Titus, reveals himself as the descendant of word-bearer sleepers whose conditioning activates during the theological upheaval. Yet Titus shows no signs of corruption or madness, maintaining the same loyalty and dedication that has characterized his service for centuries. He simply understands now that true loyalty requires embracing truths that Orthodox doctrine has denied, completing the Emperor's vision rather than clinging to its incomplete fragments. The confrontation between gene father and spiritual son transcends personal loyalty to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of faith itself. Titus explains how the Emperor's silence represents not abandonment, but transcendence, the achievement of unity with cosmic forces that Orthodox doctrine has fragmented through ignorance and fear. The Ultramarines' devotion to the Codex Astartes becomes evidence of their connection to Tzeentch's aspect of ordered change. Their willingness to die for the Imperium reveals their unity with Khorne's aspect of righteous sacrifice. Gilliman finds himself unable to refute arguments that explain so much that was previously mysterious, yet his enhanced intellect recognizes the trap that Lorgar has constructed. The word-bearer. Primarch offers answers to every theological question while subtly transforming the questions themselves. Orthodox doctrine becomes heretical through redefinition rather than replacement. Imperial faith serves chaos through evolution rather than corruption. Loyalty is maintained while its object is fundamentally altered. The war for humanity's soul reaches a crescendo as Lorgar's revelations spread through channels both mundane and mystical. The Imperial response fractures along lines that no strategic planning anticipated, with traditional allies questioning each other's understanding of fundamental truths, while ancient enemies unite against threats that transcend conventional categories. The galaxy stands poised on the brink of transformation, so profound that victory and defeat become meaningless distinctions, change and stagnation indistinguishable states. Yet even as the crisis deepens beyond any conventional solution, hope persists in the darkest corners of the imperial structure. Small groups of loyalists maintain absolute faith in orthodox doctrine, despite overwhelming evidence for alternative interpretations. These individuals represent humanity's last hope for preserving the Emperor's original vision, though they face an enemy who claims to complete that vision rather than destroy it. The final battles will be fought not with bolter and blade, but with faith itself, conviction against conviction in struggles that will determine whether humanity achieves transcendence or loses its soul in the pursuit of perfection. The galaxy convulses in the grip of theological revolution, as Lorgar's universal truth spreads like wildfire through the networks that bind the Imperium together, transforming faithful servants into willing converts faster than any military advance could achieve. The corruption operates with such devastating efficiency that entire Space Marine chapters find themselves declaring for the word-bearer cause within hours of receiving the final sermon, their millennia of conditioning proving inadequate against revelations that explain so much that orthodox doctrine leaves mysterious. Chapter Master Gabriel Seth of the Flesh Tearers stands before his assembled brotherhood in the great hall of their fortress monastery, his scarred features twisted with anguish as he reads the declaration that will damn them all in the eyes of imperial orthodoxy. Yet the words that flow from his lips carry the weight of absolute conviction, each syllable hammering home truths that his enhanced mind can no longer deny. The Emperor's silence does not represent abandonment, but transcendence. The red thirst that drives his battle brothers to drink the blood of their enemies becomes evidence of their connection to divine fury rather than genetic curse. The pattern repeats across 17 Space Marine chapters as the word-bearer doctrine penetrates even the most sacred bastions of imperial faith. The Aurora chapter declares their understanding of the true imperial creed after their chief librarian experiences visions that reconcile their psychic gifts with theological doctrine. The Fire Hawks embrace revelations that explain why their battle brothers sometimes return from the dead as vengeful spirits. The Mantis warriors discover that their guilt over past rebellion reflects deeper understanding of the cosmos than blind loyalty ever could. These are not crude conversions driven by desperation or madness, but thoughtful transformations by warriors who have examined orthodox doctrine and found it wanting. The chapters maintain their colors, their rituals, their devotion to the Emperor's vision, yet somehow these familiar elements serve new masters while appearing unchanged to outside observers. They march to war singing the same hymns their predecessors have chanted for millennia, yet the words carry meanings that would horrify any loyal servant of the throne. The corruption of cardinal worlds strikes at the very heart of imperial faith, as planets that have served as beacons of orthodoxy for thousands of years embrace theological interpretations that transform the foundations of belief itself. Ophelia VII, where Saint Sabbat herself once walked among mortals, becomes the first to declare its understanding of the universal truth. Cardinal Boros announces the revelation from his great cathedral, his words broadcast across the sector through astropathic networks that carry the infection alongside routine communications. The cardinal speaks with the measured cadence of prophecy, explaining how the Emperor's sacrifice on the golden throne represents not defeat, but the first stage of apotheosis that requires the willing participation of all humanity. The faithful have been unknowingly feeding this transformation for 10 millennia, their prayers and devotion serving to complete divine ascension rather than simply maintaining a corpse upon an ancient throne. The Chaos Gods do not oppose this process, but enable it, their aspects serving as facets of unity that orthodox doctrine has fragmented through ignorance and fear. Cardinal world after cardinal world follows Ophelia VII's example as the theological revolution spreads through channels both mundane and mystical. Dimamar declares its embrace of the perfected imperial creed. Gathalamor announces new understanding of the Emperor's true will. De Lucifer proclaims revelation that reconciles faith and reason in ways that orthodox theology never achieved. Each declaration carries more weight than military conquest, spiritual victory that transforms entire populations while leaving their devotion to imperial symbols apparently unchanged. The personal duel between Lorgar Aurelian and Chapter Master Lysander of the Imperial Fists provides the campaign's most dramatic confrontation between loyalist determination and word-bearer revelation. Lysander has served as a bulwark of imperial orthodoxy for centuries, his absolute faith in the Emperor's vision proving unshakable even in the face of impossible odds. Yet when he faces the returned Primarch in single combat above the burning ruins of Phalanx Station, he discovers that physical prowess means nothing against an enemy who attacks through truth itself. The battle unfolds in the station's great cathedral, where stained glass windows cast rainbow patterns across marble floors stained with the blood of faithful servants. Lysander strikes with his thunder hammer, the ancient weapon blazing with energy that has shattered demon princes and heretical champions. Yet Lorgar deflects each blow, not through superior skill, but through absolute certainty, his presence radiating conviction so profound that reality itself bends to accommodate his will. The theological implications strike Lysander with more force than any physical attack. The Primarch speaks while they fight, his voice carrying explanations that make terrible sense of mysteries that have plagued the imperial fists since their founding. Why do they specialize in siege warfare and defensive doctrine? Because they understand instinctively that the greatest battles are fought not for territory, but for souls. Why does their gene seed produce warriors of such unyielding determination? Because they were designed to serve as humanity's final defenders when the Emperor achieves his true apotheosis. Yet Lysander's conditioning proves sufficient to resist even these profound challenges to his worldview. The chapter master tears himself away from the Primarch's presence through sheer force of will, his psychic wards blazing as he retreats with his surviving battle brothers. The encounter leaves him shaken, but not broken, carrying questions that will haunt the imperial fists for generations. How does one maintain faith in absolute truth when confronted with truths that are more absolute? How does one serve the Emperor when his will might encompass more than orthodox doctrine acknowledges? The civilian uprisings that erupt across 5 sectors represent the most devastating aspect of Lorgar's campaign, as populations that have maintained imperial loyalty for millennia suddenly embrace new interpretations of familiar doctrine. These are not violent rebellions characterized by destruction and chaos, but peaceful transformations that leave all symbols and structures intact while fundamentally altering their meaning. Planetary governors declare renewed faith in the Emperor's vision, while serving masters that orthodox theology declares anathema. On the hive world of Necromunda, Lord Helmauer issues proclamations of theological enlightenment that spread through the underhive faster than any previous communication. The populations that dwell in darkness find themselves drawn to revelations that explain why they suffer while remaining faithful to the Emperor's will. Their prayers for salvation have been answered, but not in ways that orthodox doctrine could anticipate. The universal truth offers meaning for endless toil, purpose for unending struggle, hope for transcendence that conventional faith never provided. The pattern repeats across worlds both civilized and feral, as Lorgar's influence penetrates every level of imperial society. Agri-worlds declare their understanding of how death and rebirth serve cosmic purpose. Mining colonies embrace revelations that transform back-breaking labor into sacred duty. Even space marine recruiting worlds find their populations asking questions that challenge fundamental assumptions about service and sacrifice. The fall of the Forge world Metallica marks a turning point that sends shockwaves through the highest levels of imperial command. The Adeptus Mechanicus has always prided itself on immunity to spiritual corruption through cybernetic enhancement and logical discipline. Their machine spirits, supposedly incapable of the emotional responses that make organic minds vulnerable to chaos influence. Yet when word-bearer fleets arrive in the Metallica system, they discover that logic itself can become a vector for revelation when properly applied. Tec Dominus Coron receives the word-bearer transmission through standard communication protocols, and expecting the usual chaotic ravings that accompany heretical contact attempts. Instead, he finds himself confronting arguments that follow impeccable logical progression from premises that any servant of the Omnissiah would recognize. The Emperor and the Omnissiah are not separate entities, but aspects of the same cosmic intelligence that seeks to unify flesh and machine, order and change, knowledge and faith. The theological mathematics prove irresistible to minds trained in binary absolutes. If the Omnissiah represents knowledge and the Emperor represents faith, then their unity encompasses all aspects of existence that orthodox doctrine has artificially separated. The Chaos Gods do not oppose this union, but enable it, their domains representing different facets of the cosmic intelligence that drives existence toward perfect synthesis. Of the quest for knowledge that motivates every tech adept becomes part of a greater pattern that includes emotional spectrum, temporal flow, and even entropy itself. Within hours of receiving these revelations, Metallica's forged temples ring with hymns that blend imperial and mechanical doctrine in ways that make both more compelling. Tech priests who have served for centuries without questioning their purpose discover meanings that explain the contradictions they have carried since induction into the Mechanicus. The machine spirits that inhabit their sacred devices begin singing in harmony with biological consciousness, creating synthesis that transcends the artificial division between flesh and metal. The desperate alliance that forms between surviving loyalist forces represents humanity's last hope for preserving orthodox doctrine in the face of overwhelming theological pressure. Lord Commander Gilliman coordinates efforts from his fortress on Terra, while chapter masters who have resisted word-bearer influence gather their remaining forces for what may be the final defense of the Emperor's original vision. These are not the grand coalitions that have characterized previous imperial campaigns, but small groups of determined survivors who maintain absolute faith despite evidence that suggests alternative interpretations. High Marshal Helbrecht of the Black Templars leads his crusading fleets in alliance with Grey Knight brotherhoods that have somehow maintained their spiritual purity despite exposure to Lorgar's revelations. Sister Superior Celestian of the Order of Our Martyred Lady coordinates with Inquisitor Lord Kyrian to identify and eliminate word-bearer sleeper cells before they can complete their activations. Even some elements of the Adeptus Mechanicus resist the corruption spreading through their ranks, their loyalty to orthodox interpretation of the Omnissiah proving stronger than logical arguments for theological synthesis. Yet even as these alliances form, their leaders recognize the magnitude of the challenge they face. This is not conventional warfare that can be won through superior tactics or firepower, but ideological struggle where the enemy offers everything that loyal servants claim to want. How does one fight against forces that promise to fulfill the Emperor's vision while maintaining perfect loyalty to imperial symbols? How does one preserve faith when alternative interpretations seem to resolve theological mysteries that orthodox doctrine cannot explain? The first reports of word-bearer fleets approaching the Sol system arrive through channels so heavily encrypted that only the highest levels of imperial command receive the intelligence. These are not scattered warbands or opportunistic raiders, but organized armadas that move with the precision of a well-orchestrated symphony. Their formation displays tactical acumen that rivals anything the Codex Astartes prescribes, yet they advance under banners that proclaim loyalty to the Emperor's vision while serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. Port Navigator houses throughout the Segmentum Solar Report disturbances in the warp that suggest massive fleet movements converging on humanity's birthworld. The Astronomicon itself flickers with interference patterns that astropaths struggle to interpret, its light carrying undertones that make their enhanced minds recoil in recognition of truths they cannot voice. Even the Emperor's psychic presence seems to shift in ways that suggest anticipation rather than alarm, as if the master of mankind welcomes whatever approaches Terra's outer system. Lord Admiral Spire leads the Solar Defense Fleet in preparation for siege warfare that may determine the fate of humanity itself. His vessels represent the finest examples of imperial naval architecture, their crews drawn from bloodlines that have served the Emperor for generations without question. Yet as they take position around Terra's outer planets, they find themselves confronting an enemy whose very presence seems to drain the will to fight through spiritual rather than physical means. The psychological impact on Imperial forces proves devastating as they prepare for battle against enemies who claim to serve the same master they revere. Word-bearer ships broadcast sermons during their approach, their chaplains preaching while preparing for combat that may never materialize. Their transmissions carry familiar symbols and rituals, transformed to serve new purposes, prayers for the Emperor's glory, that somehow carry meanings that orthodox doctrine cannot accommodate. Chapter Master Tushan of the Salamanders receives orders to defend the approaches to Terra with his full chapter strength, yet finds himself questioning fundamental assumptions about the nature of their enemy. The word-bearers they face show no signs of the corruption or madness that characterizes typical Chaos forces. Their ships maintain perfect formation, their communications follow standard Imperial protocols. Their battle brothers die with the same prayers on their lips that salamanders have recited for millennia. The war for humanity's soul reaches its crescendo as Lorgar's influence spreads to the very gates of the Imperial Palace, while loyalist forces prepare for battles that may preserve orthodox faith or complete its transformation into something altogether different. The galaxy holds its breath as two visions of the Emperor's will prepare for final confrontation, on neither side certain whether victory or defeat will preserve what they claim to protect. The ultimate corruption reaches its zenith, while the last alliance forms to face truths that may be more terrible than any lie, revelations that promise salvation while threatening damnation in ways that transcend conventional understanding of both concepts. The galaxy's fate hangs in the balance as Lord Commander Robuta Guilliman leads the greatest fleet assembled since the dark days of the Horus Heresy into the shattered remains of the Cadian Gate, where the word-bearer armadas have gathered like a storm front of golden lightning and crimson death. The combined Imperial force represents the last desperate gambit of a species fighting for its soul, or the battle groups drawn from across the segmentum solar, united under the banner of a Primarch who has witnessed one brother's fall and refuses to allow another to complete humanity's destruction. The fleet that follows Guilliman into the void stretches across light minutes of space, its composition reading like a roll call of humanity's greatest champions. The Grey Knights deploy 7 full brotherhoods, their silver hulls gleaming with psychic wards that make the warp itself recoil. The Adeptus Custodes contribute their most sacred vessels, each ship a masterwork of archaeotech that has guarded Terra since the Emperor's ascension. Space Marine chapters that have resisted word-bearer corruption bring their full strength to bear, with their battle barges and strike cruisers forming the backbone of a force that carries the hopes of 10,000 worlds. Yet as impressive as this armada appears, Guilliman knows that conventional force means nothing against an enemy who converts rather than conquers. The intelligence reports speak of word-bearer fleets that advance through surrender rather than victory, their chaplains preaching sermons that transform defeat into willing collaboration. The Lord Commander has studied every engagement in the campaign, analyzing patterns that defy military logic while achieving strategic objectives that traditional warfare could never accomplish. The space battle that erupts at the Mandeville Point eclipses any void warfare seen since the siege of Terra itself. Lance batteries firing concentrated starlight, while torpedo salvos carried death across impossible distances. Word-bearer ships advance in formations that blend tactical precision with theological symbolism, their movements tracing patterns that serve both strategic and spiritual purposes. Each vessel bears the marks of 10,000 years in the eye of Terra, yet they fight with discipline that rivals the most elite Imperial forces. Captain General Trajan Valoris leads the Custodian Guard in boarding actions that penetrate the heart of word-bearer command ships, his guardian spear cutting through traitor space marines with movements too perfect for mortal eyes to follow. The custodes fight as they were created to fight, each warrior a masterwork of the Emperor's genetic artistry, wielded in defense of humanity's birthright. Yet as they advance through corridors that pulse with golden light, they encounter resistance that transcends mere physical opposition. The word-bearers they face show no fear of death, no desperation of cornered enemies, no signs of the corruption that should characterize servants of the dark gods. They fight with the same dedication that custodies bring to their own service, dying with prayers to the emperor on their lips, while somehow serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. Their chaplains quote imperial scripture with perfect accuracy, while wielding weapons that channel divine authority in ways that make Valoris's enhanced mind struggle to process the contradictions. The confrontation between Guilliman and Lorgar transcends personal rivalry to become a battle between competing visions of humanity's destiny. The two sons of the Emperor, whose understanding of their father's will has diverged beyond any possibility of reconciliation. They meet in the cathedral-sized command chamber of the Word-Bearer flagship, where reality itself bends around the presence of transhuman beings whose power dwarfs anything achieved by lesser mortals. The duel that follows operates on levels that encompass both physical and spiritual combat, as the two Primarchs clash with weapons that channel the fundamental forces of existence itself. Guilliman strikes with the Emperor's sword, its burning blade carrying the fury of a species that refuses to surrender its birthright to chaos and corruption. Yet Lorgar deflects each attack, not through superior skill, but through absolute certainty. His presence radiating conviction so profound that it warps the fabric of reality around him. The theological debate that accompanies their combat proves more devastating than any physical blow, as Lorgar explains the true scope of his vision with the patient precision of a teacher addressing a beloved but misguided student. The Emperor's silence does not represent failure, but transcendence, the achievement of unity with cosmic forces that mere mortals can barely comprehend. The endless war that consumes the galaxy serves not as tragedy, but as necessity, the crucible of conflict refining human souls toward perfect synthesis with divine authority. Yet Guilliman's response carries the weight of 10,000 years of unwavering service. His strategic mind, recognizing the trap that his brother has constructed, while refusing to accept its fundamental premise. The Emperor created the Primarchs as tools for achieving specific objectives, not as gods to be worshipped or forces to be transcended. Humanity's destiny lies in rational progress and technological mastery, not in submission to cosmic entities whose nature transcends mortal understanding. The battle reaches its climax when Captain General Valoris joins the confrontation, his presence adding the weight of imperial authority to Guilliman's strategic brilliance. The two loyalist champions coordinate their attacks with precision, born of centuries of cooperation, their weapons striking in perfect harmony while their enhanced minds calculate optimal targeting solutions. Yet even their combined might proves insufficient against an enemy who has spent 10 millennia in meditation on truths that transcend conventional understanding. Lorgar demonstrates power that dwarfs anything he possessed during the Horus Heresy. His psychic abilities evolved beyond recognition through communion with forces that exist outside normal space and time. He deflects their attacks through faith, so perfect that it renders hostile force meaningless, speaking of revelations that complete the Emperor's vision, while somehow serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares antithetical to humanity's survival. The sacrifice of the Fifth Brotherhood of Grey Knights marks the battle's turning point, as these ultimate warriors against chaos choose destruction over conversion in the face of truths too terrible to accept. Brother Captain Stern leads his battle brothers in a psychic assault that tears through the barriers between material and immaterial reality, their combined will focused on banishing the greater demon allies that serve as Lorgar's most powerful weapons. The ritual that follows transcends conventional understanding of sacrifice, as the Grey Knights pour their very essence into warp fire that burns through layers of reality itself. Each brother contributes his soul to flames that consume not just flesh, but the spiritual foundations of existence, creating a conflagration that forces even demon princes to retreat into the deepest recesses of the Eye of Terror. The psychic backlash reverberates across both fleets, disrupting warp drives and psychic communications, while temporarily severing the connection between material and immaterial realms. The word-bearer retreat that follows the Grey Knight sacrifice appears to vindicate imperial strategy as Lorgar's fleets withdraw in apparent disorder, their formations breaking apart under the weight of losses that conventional analysis suggests they cannot sustain. Imperial commanders report tactical victory across multiple engagement zones as enemy vessels flee into warp storms that hide their movements from conventional sensors. Yet even as celebration spreads through Imperial ranks, Guilliman experiences growing unease that his strategic intuition cannot explain. The word-bearer withdrawal follows patterns too convenient to represent genuine defeat, but their movements suggesting coordination rather than chaos, despite apparent losses that should have shattered their command structure. His enhanced intellect recognizes elements that do not fit the tactical picture, inconsistencies that suggest deeper planning than surface analysis reveals. The revelation comes through intercepted word-bearer transmissions that penetrate Imperial encryption with disturbing ease, broadcasts that speak not of defeat, but of successful completion of preliminary objectives. Lorgar's voice carries across the void with explanations that make Guilliman's superhuman mind real with implications too terrible to fully comprehend. The assault on the combined Imperial fleet was never intended to achieve military victory, but to serve as diversion for operations that transcend conventional understanding of warfare. Or the true target of Lorgar's campaign becomes clear as word-bearer sleeper cells activate simultaneously across Terra itself, their members moving to positions within the Imperial Palace, where the Emperor's psychic beacon maintains its eternal vigil. These are not saboteurs seeking to destroy physical infrastructure, but theologians prepared to complete spiritual work that began 10,000 years ago during the Horus heresy itself. The Astronomicon represents more than mere navigation aid for ships traveling through the warp, Lorgar explains through transmissions that bypass conventional communications to speak directly to enhanced minds capable of processing cosmic truth. The psychic beacon serves as focal point for human faith, or collecting the prayers and devotions of billions of souls across the galaxy, while channeling that spiritual energy towards sustaining the Emperor's physical form. Yet this same mechanism can be redirected toward completing divine apotheosis that orthodox doctrine has denied through ignorance and fear. The implications strike Imperial commanders with the force of gravitational bombardment as they realize the magnitude of deception that Lorgar has orchestrated. The entire campaign, from the corruption of cardinal worlds to the massive space battles above the Cadian Gate's remains, has served to distract Imperial attention from preparations that target the very source of humanity's spiritual unity, while loyal forces fought to preserve Orthodox faith through military means, while word-bearer agents positioned themselves to transform that faith through theological revolution. Captain General Valoris receives emergency communications from Terra that confirm Guilliman's worst fears, as custodian guards report infiltrators within the Imperial Palace itself, individuals whose genetic markers identify them as loyal servants, but whose theological arguments penetrate even the most rigorous mental conditioning. These are not chaos cultists driven by madness or desperation, but thoughtful servants who have examined Orthodox doctrine and found it incomplete, seeking to perfect the Emperor's vision rather than destroy it. The race to return to Terra begins as Imperial fleets abandon their positions above the Cadian Gate in desperate attempts to reach humanity's birthworld before Lorgar's true plan reaches completion. Yet the vast distances involved ensure that even the fastest vessels will require days or weeks to traverse space that word-bearer agents have already infiltrated, through decades or centuries of careful preparation. Guilliman coordinates the withdrawal with tactical precision that masks growing desperation as he recognizes the scope of his brother's strategic vision. Lorgar has not simply returned as the same ambitious Primarch who fell to chaos during the heresy, but evolved into something far more dangerous, a being who understands the fundamental contradictions in imperial doctrine and knows exactly how to exploit them. The Word-Bearer campaign represents not rebellion in any conventional sense, but theological revolution that threatens to transform the very foundations of human faith. The final transmission from Lorgar carries across the void with revelations that chill even Guilliman's superhuman composure as the Word-Bearer Primarch explains the ultimate scope of his vision. The Emperor sits upon the golden throne, not as corpse sustained by ancient machinery, but as chrysalis containing divine potential that 10,000 years of human faith have slowly brought toward maturation. The time has come to complete this process, transforming the master of mankind from distant figure of worship into active participant in cosmic forces that drive existence itself. The galaxy trembles as two visions of humanity's future prepare for final confrontation, not through military force, but through spiritual warfare that will determine whether the species achieves transcendence or preserves the foundations of rational existence. The last crusade ends not in victory or defeat, but in recognition that the real battle has only just begun, fought on levels that transcend conventional understanding of war, faith, and the very nature of divine authority itself. Imperial fleets race toward Terra, carrying the hopes of a species that may have already lost the war for its soul through victories that served enemy purposes more effectively than any defeat. The Word-Bearer Gambit stands revealed as masterwork of strategic deception that used humanity's greatest strengths against itself, converting loyal service into unwitting collaboration while maintaining perfect loyalty to symbols and structures that no longer serve their original purposes. The approach to Terra will determine whether 10,000 years of imperial doctrine can withstand challenges that attack through truth rather than lies, completion rather than corruption, love rather than hatred. The final battle awaits, yet neither side can claim certainty about what victory or defeat will ultimately mean for the future of human consciousness in a cosmos where the boundaries between order and chaos have begun to dissolve beyond recognition. The heart of Terra trembles as Lorgar Aurelian descends upon humanity's birthworld, not as conqueror, but as prophet come to complete divine work that began 10,000 years ago in the fires of the Horus heresy. His approach through the soul system creates disturbances in reality itself, or waves of psychic pressure that make the very atoms of sacred soil sing with frequencies that mortal minds were never meant to perceive. The Golden Primarch walks through the ruins of ancient battlefields where his brothers once fought and died, his presence transforming hallowed ground into something that serves purposes far beyond conventional understanding. The Imperial Palace erupts in defensive preparation as alerts cascade through communication networks that carry undertones of theological revolution alongside tactical intelligence. Captain General Trajan Valoris coordinates the response with precision born of 10,000 years of protecting humanity's most sacred treasures, yet his enhanced mind struggles to process reports that defy every contingency the Custodes have prepared for across millennia of vigilant service. This is not invasion in any conventional sense, but transformation, change so fundamental that victory and defeat become meaningless distinctions. The custodian guards take their positions in the deepest vaults beneath the palace, where reality itself is reinforced against the touch of forces that exist beyond normal space and time. These warriors represent the finest examples of human enhancement ever achieved, each one a masterwork of the Emperor's genetic artistry, wielded in defense of treasures that sustain the species itself. Yet as they prepare for battle against one of their creator's own sons, they find themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about loyalty, duty, and the very nature of the master they serve. Lorgar's psychic assault penetrates the palace's defenses through vectors that bypass conventional protection, his consciousness flowing through the dreams and prayers of faithful servants who unknowingly carry the seeds of theological revolution in their souls. Word-bearer sleeper agents activate throughout the vast structure, their movements coordinated with precision that suggests planning across centuries or millennia. These are not saboteurs seeking to destroy infrastructure, but theologians prepared to complete spiritual work that transcends any single lifetime or generation. The assault on the Golden Throne chamber itself unfolds as confrontation between competing visions of divine authority rather than simple military action. Lorgar approaches the Emperor's resting place not with weapons drawn, but with revelations that explain mysteries which have haunted humanity since the Master of Mankind first ascended to his eternal vigil. The psychic emanations from his transformed consciousness penetrate barriers that have withstood demon princes and chaos gods, carrying truths that make even custodian conditioning falter in recognition of possibilities too terrible to deny. Captain General Valoris leads the final defense of the throne chamber with determination that transcends mere duty, his guardian spear blazing with energy that channels the collective will of every loyal servant who has ever died in the Emperor's name. The Custodes advance in formation that represents 10,000 years of tactical refinement, their movements achieving perfection that lesser mortals could never comprehend. Yet, as they close with Lorgar, they discover that their greatest strengths have become vulnerabilities against an enemy who attacks through love rather than hatred. The word-bearer, Primarch, speaks while they fight, his voice carrying explanations that penetrate psychic defenses designed to resist any form of corruption. He does not seek to destroy their loyalty, but to perfect it, revealing how their service to the Emperor can be completed rather than merely continued. The Master of Mankind sits upon the Golden Throne not as corpse sustained by ancient machinery, but as chrysalis containing divine potential that faithful service has slowly brought toward maturation. The time has come to witness the emergence of something far greater than any mortal ruler. The theological implications of these revelations strike the Custodes with force that transcends physical combat as they realize the magnitude of transformation that Lorgar proposes. If the Primarch speaks truth, then 10,000 years of guarding a corpse becomes instead the protection of humanity's greatest treasure during its most vulnerable phase. Their vigil has not preserved death, but enabled life at levels that mortal consciousness can barely comprehend. The Emperor's silence represents not failure, but preparation for ascension that will unite all aspects of existence under divine authority. Yet even as these truths assault their understanding, the Custodes maintain their charge through conditioning that proves stronger than revelation itself. They strike at Lorgar with weapons that channel not just physical force, but the accumulated faith of countless generations who have served without question or reward. Their guardian spears pierce reality itself as they seek to prevent transformation that might elevate humanity beyond recognition while destroying everything that makes the species worth preserving. The confrontation between Lorgar and the spiritual essence of the Emperor transcends any battle fought in the material realm, as consciousness that spans galaxies engages with intelligence that has contemplated cosmic truth for 10 millennia. The Master of Mankind responds to his son's presence not with silence, but with communication that operates on levels beyond mortal comprehension, thoughts that encompass the rise and fall of civilizations, expressed through concepts that make language itself seem crude and inadequate. The dialogue that unfolds in the psychic realm reveals truths that shake the foundations of reality, as the Emperor acknowledges elements of Lorgar's vision while rejecting conclusions that would transform humanity beyond all recognition. The Chaos Gods do indeed represent aspects of consciousness that rational thought cannot eliminate, yet their embrace leads not to transcendence, but to stagnation at cosmic levels, where individual will dissolves into collective unconsciousness. The path forward requires synthesis rather than surrender, evolution rather than apotheosis. Lorgar's response carries the weight of absolute conviction, backed by millennia of meditation on cosmic forces that lesser minds fragment into comprehensible pieces. Humanity's destiny cannot be achieved through half measures or incomplete understanding, but requires full embrace of truths that orthodox doctrine has denied through ignorance and fear. The Emperor's vision was never meant to create a sterile empire of reason and order, but to guide the species toward unity with forces that drive existence itself. The process demands willing participation rather than unconscious submission. The corruption of the Astronomicon sends shock waves through the galaxy as the psychic beacon that guides human navigation begins broadcasting signals that carry theological revolution alongside routine guidance. Navigator houses across the segmentum solar report disturbances in the warp that suggest fundamental changes in the nature of reality itself, currents that sing with voices almost familiar, yet somehow transformed beyond recognition. Ships attempting to reach Terra find themselves drawn toward destinations that exist only in prophecy and nightmare. The galaxy reels under the impact of navigational chaos as the very foundations of interstellar travel begin to shift in ways that no amount of technological sophistication can compensate. Merchant fleets disappear into warp storms that carry them to systems that should not exist. Military vessels emerge from routine jumps to discover that familiar star patterns have been replaced by constellations that spell out theological arguments in languages older than human civilization. The Sisters of Silence make their ultimate sacrifice as these warriors, whose very existence nullifies psychic power, throw themselves into the psychic maelstrom surrounding the Golden Throne, their consciousness offering itself as fuel for barriers that might contain forces beyond mortal comprehension. Knight Centura Alea leads her sisters in ritual that transcends mere death to become transformation of essence itself, their souls merging with defensive systems that have protected humanity's greatest treasure for 10,000 years. The psychic backlash from their sacrifice reverberates through both material and immaterial realms as the barriers between order and chaos temporarily solidify enough to prevent immediate transformation, while allowing gradual change that might preserve elements of human nature during whatever evolution awaits. The sisters' willing dissolution creates zones of stability in the psychic storm, islands of conventional reality, where consciousness can maintain individual identity, while cosmic forces rage beyond comprehension. Yet even their ultimate sacrifice proves insufficient to prevent Lorgar's attempt to merge with the Emperor's consciousness as the word-bearer Primarch approaches the Golden Throne itself, his enhanced physiology beginning the transformation that would unite transhuman intelligence with divine awareness in synthesis that transcends both individual and collective existence. The process unfolds through stages that make reality itself weep, matter and energy bending to accommodate consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions simultaneously. The intervention of the Legion of the Damned marks the Emperor's final gambit as these mysterious warriors materialize from the warp itself, their flame-wreathed forms serving as vessels for divine will that operates beyond the boundaries of life and death. They advance through the throne chamber, with movements that suggest existence outside normal temporal flow, their weapons striking not just at physical targets, but at the conceptual foundations of Lorgar's transformation. The Legion fights with purpose that transcends individual survival or tactical objectives, each warrior serving as instrument of intelligence that encompasses the collected experience of every human soul that has ever lived or died in service to the species. Their assault on Lorgar operates through mechanisms that bypass conventional understanding of combat, attacking the philosophical foundations of his vision while offering alternative paths toward transcendence that preserve rather than dissolve individual consciousness. The battle that follows exists simultaneously across multiple planes of existence as material combat blends with theological debate, psychic warfare merges with philosophical discourse, and the very nature of consciousness becomes battlefield upon which humanity's future will be determined. Lorgar withstands the Legion's assault through conviction so profound that it warps causality itself, while the damned warriors strike with purpose that draws strength from every prayer ever offered to the Emperor's memory. The climactic moment arrives when Lorgar's consciousness finally touches that of the Emperor directly, their merged awareness creating possibilities that exist beyond conventional understanding of divinity, mortality, or the boundaries between individual and cosmic consciousness. For one eternal instant, the word-bearer Primarch experiences truth so complete that it encompasses all contradictions while resolving none. Knowledge that explains everything while changing nothing, understanding that offers transcendence at the cost of everything that makes consciousness worth preserving. The apparent destruction of Lorgar Aurelian unfolds through mechanisms that operate beyond conventional death as his enhanced physiology simply ceases to exist in ways that make observation itself impossible. Whether he has been annihilated or transformed becomes a question that language cannot address, his essence potentially scattered across dimensions that exist outside normal space and time, while somehow remaining concentrated enough to maintain individual identity. The throne chamber falls silent except for the eternal hum of machinery that sustains the Emperor's physical form. Yet those who witness the aftermath cannot escape the feeling that something fundamental has changed in ways that will only become apparent across decades or centuries of gradual revelation. The Master of Mankind continues his vigil unchanged, yet somehow different, his presence carrying undertones that suggest knowledge gained through confrontation with truths that no mortal mind could safely contemplate. Captain General Valoris surveys the devastation with enhanced senses that detect disturbances in reality's fabric, tears in the boundaries between possible and actual that may never fully heal, despite the apparent victory over forces that threatened to transform humanity beyond all recognition. The Golden Throne continues to function. The Emperor maintains his eternal watch, yet something has shifted in the cosmic balance that determines the species' relationship with forces that exist beyond mortal comprehension. The galaxy begins the slow process of recovery from theological revolution that has shaken the foundations of faith while leaving most of its structures apparently intact. Yet those who possess the knowledge to perceive deeper truths recognize that the war for humanity's soul has ended not in victory or defeat, but in transformation so subtle that its implications may not become clear for generations or millennia. The word-bearer fleets withdraw from Sol System as mysteriously as they arrived, their departure leaving behind questions that will haunt Imperial command for ages to come, while populations across thousands of worlds continue to embrace new interpretations of familiar doctrine that somehow serve different masters while maintaining perfect loyalty to recognizable symbols and structures. The Emperor's silence continues, yet somehow carries different meanings for those who have witnessed the confrontation between competing visions of divine authority, his psychic presence suggesting patience rather than passivity, as cosmic forces continue their eternal dance around consciousness that has learned to exist across multiple planes of reality simultaneously. The throne chamber returns to its eternal vigil, But the galaxy will never again be quite the same for those who understand what was at stake in the battle between father and son over humanity's ultimate destiny. The silence that follows the storm echoes through the halls of the Imperial Palace like a funeral dirge for certainties that will never return, as the defenders of Terra struggle to comprehend the magnitude of what they have preserved and what they have lost in the process. The Golden Throne continues its eternal hum, yet something fundamental has changed in the cosmic resonance that sustains the master of mankind's physical form. Captain General Trajan Valoris stands vigil in the throne chamber, where reality itself bears scars from confrontation between divine intelligences, his enhanced senses detecting disturbances that may never fully heal despite apparent victory over forces that threaten to transform humanity beyond recognition. The Astronomicon flickers with irregularity that sends tremors of fear through navigator houses across the galaxy, its once steady beacon now wavering like a candle flame in cosmic winds that no mortal science can measure or predict. The psychic lighthouse that has guided humanity through the warp for 10,000 years struggles to maintain coherence, but its signals carrying static that speaks of damage at levels deeper than physical infrastructure. Entire sectors find themselves cut off from reliable navigation as the Emperor's psychic presence dims in ways that suggest spiritual rather than technological failure. Navigator Primus Belisarius of House Nostromo reports phenomena that defy explanation to Lord Commander Gilliman during emergency briefings convened in the deepest vaults beneath the palace. The warp itself appears changed by whatever transpired during Lorgar's assault, currents of psychic energy flowing in patterns that ancient lore declares impossible. Ships attempting routine translation between systems find themselves emerging in locations that exist only in theological texts, their navigators babbling about visions that blend imperial and word-bearer doctrine in ways that make orthodox training seem incomplete rather than corrupted. The immediate tactical situation proves almost as disturbing as the strategic implications. Word-bearer fleets have withdrawn from the Sol system as mysteriously as they arrived, yet their departure leaves behind questions that will haunt Imperial Command for ages to come. Intelligence reports suggest coordinated retreat rather than chaotic flight, their movements displaying tactical coherence that indicates surviving command structure despite apparent losses that should have shattered their organizational capacity. Across the galaxy, millions of Imperial citizens who embraced Lorgar's universal truth during the campaign continue to practice their faith with perfect devotion to recognizable symbols, while somehow serving purposes that orthodox doctrine cannot accommodate. These populations show no signs of chaos corruption in any conventional sense, their societies functioning with efficiency that often exceeds pre-conversion levels. Yet their prayers carry undertones that make astropaths refuse transmission. Their celebrations follow rhythms that suggest connection to forces beyond mortal comprehension. The theological crisis proves more devastating than any military defeat, as the ecclesiarchy fragments along lines that no amount of inquisitorial intervention can heal. Cardinal Vex attempts to maintain orthodox doctrine from his cathedral on Terra, and yet his sermons sound hollow compared to revelations that explain so much that was previously mysterious. Cardinals who embraced reformed interpretations continue to preach with perfect loyalty to imperial symbols, yet somehow their words transform familiar concepts into service of truths that make traditional theology seem incomplete rather than correct. Archbishop Cornelius of the Segmentum Solar discovers that attempts to purge reformed elements from the priesthood result only in further fragmentation, as Orthodox clerics find themselves unable to answer questions that word-bearer doctrine addresses with disturbing clarity. Why does the Emperor remain silent while his children suffer? How can faith in distant Terra compare to manifestations of divine presence that walk among mortals? What purpose does endless war serve if it brings neither peace nor victory to those who sacrifice everything in its prosecution? The fracture spreads through every level of imperial religious hierarchy, as the faithful find themselves choosing between competing interpretations of identical doctrine, each side claiming perfect loyalty to the emperor's vision, while reaching conclusions that make unity impossible. Some maintain absolute adherence to orthodox theology, despite its apparent contradictions. Others embrace revelations that complete their understanding, while somehow transforming the foundation of their beliefs. Still others attempt to find synthesis between competing truths, creating hybrid doctrines that satisfy neither camp while opening new theological wounds. The multiple Space Marine chapters discover that their resistance to word-bearer corruption has come at costs that may prove unsustainable in the long term. The Aurora chapter reports 17 battle brothers lost to theological uncertainty that makes combat effectiveness impossible, their conditioning proving insufficient against questions that no amount of indoctrination can answer. The Mantis warriors find their chaplains divided between those who maintain orthodox interpretation and those who embrace reformed understanding, their spiritual unity fractured beyond any possibility of repair. Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines faces his own crisis of faith as reports filter in from across Ultramar about populations that embraced word-bearer doctrine during the campaign, yet continue to function with loyalty that appears undiminished while serving purposes that strategic analysis cannot fully comprehend. The citizens of Macragge itself show no signs of rebellion or corruption, yet their prayers follow patterns that make even Calgar's enhanced mind struggle to distinguish between devotion and heresy. The loss of Brother Captain Titus to theological revelation rather than battlefield death proves particularly devastating to Ultramarines' morale, as warriors who have served for centuries find themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about loyalty, duty, and the nature of service itself. What if one of their most respected leaders could embrace alternative interpretation of imperial doctrine while maintaining perfect dedication to the Emperor's memory? What certainties remain for those who continue to serve orthodox understanding? Lord Commander Guilliman consolidates power with efficiency that masks growing desperation as he recognizes the scope of institutional damage that Lorgar's campaign has inflicted upon the Imperium's fundamental structures. The Primarch, who has spent his existence believing in order, reason, and systematic solutions, finds himself governing populations that maintain perfect loyalty to imperial symbols while somehow serving masters that strategic doctrine declares antithetical to humanity's survival. The emergency powers that Guilliman assumes stretch constitutional precedent to breaking point as he bypasses traditional checks on authority in desperate attempts to prevent complete imperial collapse. The High Lords of Terra find their influence circumvented by executive decisions that concentrate unprecedented power in the hands of a single individual. Yet even they recognize that conventional governance proves inadequate to address crises that operate on theological rather than political levels. Administrative reports from across the Imperium paint pictures of systematic transformation that defies conventional analysis. Planets that should be racked by civil war instead display unity that exceeds pre-campaign levels. The military units that embraced reformed doctrine maintain discipline that rivals the most elite formations, while somehow serving purposes that orthodox training never addressed. Trade routes function with efficiency that suggests coordination beyond any single authority's ability to orchestrate. The intelligence networks that Guilliman deploys to monitor these developments report phenomena that strain the boundaries of rational explanation. Word-bearer sleeper cells continue to activate across the galaxy, despite their parent organization's apparent defeat, their members moving to positions within institutions that should be impervious to infiltration. These agents show no signs of foreign conditioning or external control, their dedication to imperial service appearing genuine while somehow transforming the nature of that service from within. Inquisitor Lord Kyrian leads investigations that uncover evidence of word-bearer influence dating back centuries or millennia, suggesting preparation that began long before Lorgar's recent return to active campaigning. Ancient texts hidden in cathedral archives contain theological arguments that anticipate recent developments with disturbing precision. Bloodlines traced through genealogical records reveal connections to word-bearer recruitment from the Horus heresy itself, genetic inheritance that carries conditioning activated only by specific theological triggers. The discovery that Lorgar's abhorrent destruction may have been another deception sends shockwaves through the highest levels of imperial command as psychic reconnaissance suggests possibilities that conventional death cannot accommodate. The word-bearer Primarch's enhanced physiology simply ceased to exist in ways that make observation itself impossible, yet his essence may have dispersed across dimensions that exist outside normal space and time, while maintaining sufficient coherence to continue influencing events through mechanisms that no mortal science can detect or predict. Astropathic monitoring stations report brief contacts with consciousness that bears familiar signatures despite apparent annihilation, communications that suggest survival in forms that transcend conventional understanding of life and death. These transmissions carry theological content that continues to spread through imperial communication networks, their influence operating with subtlety that bypasses traditional security measures while somehow transforming the meaning of routine administrative traffic. Word-bearer fleets scattered across the galaxy continue guerrilla warfare that targets not infrastructure but belief itself, their raids focusing on population centers where they preach sermons that convert rather than conquer. Imperial forces dispatched to suppress these activities find themselves facing enemies who quote identical scripture while somehow transforming its meaning through emphasis and interpretation. Theological warfare that proves more effective than conventional military action. But the psychological impact on imperial forces proves devastating as they discover that victory against word-bearer positions often results in conversion rather than conquest, populations that welcome liberation only to embrace reformed understanding of imperial doctrine that makes their rescue feel like defeat. How does one preserve orthodoxy when alternative interpretations appear to provide more complete answers to theological questions? How does one fight an enemy whose defeat seems to advance their strategic objectives more effectively than any battlefield success? Captain General Valoris attempts to restore normal function to the palace guard, despite recognition that normalcy itself has been fundamentally altered by confrontation with truths that no amount of conditioning could have prepared them to face. The Custodes maintained their vigil with dedication that transcends mere duty, yet their service now carries awareness of mysteries that make absolute faith seem naive rather than pure. The Emperor's psychic presence continues to emanate from the Golden Throne, yet those with sufficient sensitivity detect changes that suggest transformation rather than diminishment. The master of mankind's consciousness appears to have absorbed elements of the confrontation with Lorgar, his awareness encompassing possibilities that it previously excluded, while somehow maintaining the essential nature that has sustained humanity through 10,000 years of darkness. The reports that filter through imperial bureaucracy describe an empire that functions with apparent normality while undergoing changes so fundamental that their ultimate implications may not become clear for generations or millennia. Populations maintain perfect loyalty to imperial symbols while somehow serving purposes that orthodox doctrine cannot accommodate. Military units follow established protocols while conducting operations that strategic analysis cannot fully explain. Religious services continue in familiar forms while carrying meanings that make traditional theology seem incomplete rather than incorrect. Lord Commander Gilliman stares at strategic maps that show an imperium superficially intact yet fundamentally altered by theological revolution that has succeeded through apparent defeat. His enhanced intellect struggling to process the implications of victory that may have served enemy objectives more effectively than any conventional conquest. The galaxy remains under Imperial control, yet the nature of that control has been transformed in ways that make traditional measures of success and failure meaningless. The price of victory becomes clear as the Imperium discovers that preserving its physical structure may have cost its spiritual foundation, saving the Emperor's body while potentially transforming his legacy in ways that make Orthodox worship impossible to distinguish from Reformed heresy. The war for humanity's soul may have ended not in triumph or defeat, but in synthesis that transcends both concepts while threatening to make the distinction between loyalty and betrayal as meaningless as the difference between victory and surrender. The galaxy settles into new patterns of existence that appear stable on the surface, while carrying potential for changes that may not manifest for decades or centuries, leaving those who fought in the final battle uncertain whether they preserved humanity's destiny or witnessed the beginning of its transformation into something altogether different. The Emperor's silence continues, yet somehow carries different meanings for those who understand what was truly at stake in the confrontation between competing visions of divine authority and human consciousness. Or the new reality settles across the galaxy, like ash from a funeral pyre that burns with fires no mortal eye can perceive, as humanity awakens to discover that the war for its soul has ended not in victory or defeat, but in transformation so subtle that most cannot distinguish between salvation and damnation. The Imperium remains, its structures intact and its symbols unchanged, yet something fundamental has shifted in the cosmic balance that determines whether faith serves truth or truth serves faith. In the grim darkness of the 42nd millennium, the question of which gods humanity truly worships has become as meaningless as the distinction between loyalty and heresy. Lord Commander Robut Guilliman governs an empire split along theological lines that no amount of military force can resolve, his strategic genius confronting problems that transcend conventional solutions while threatening to tear apart the very foundations of human civilization. The Primarch, who once believed that reason and order could overcome any obstacle, discovers that faith itself has become battlefield upon which the species' future will be determined through mechanisms that no tactical manual ever anticipated. The establishment of martial law across core imperial worlds represents acknowledgement that conventional governance proves inadequate when populations maintain perfect loyalty to familiar symbols, while somehow serving purposes that orthodox doctrine cannot accommodate. Guilliman's emergency edicts bypass constitutional precedent as he attempts to preserve institutional stability during theological revolution that operates through conversion rather than conquest, love rather than hatred, truth rather than lies. On Terra itself, the cathedral districts echo with competing sermons as Orthodox priests struggle to maintain traditional interpretations against Reformed clerics who quote identical scripture while transforming its meaning through emphasis and context. The faithful gather in the same sacred spaces their ancestors have honored for millennia, yet their prayers carry undertones that make astropaths refuse transmission while somehow maintaining perfect devotion to imperial symbols and structures. And the Cardinal Matthias of the Western Diocese preaches from pulpits that have proclaimed Orthodox doctrine for 10,000 years. Yet his words explain theological mysteries that traditional teaching left unaddressed. The Emperor's silence becomes evidence of transcendence rather than abandonment. The endless war that consumes the galaxy serves cosmic purpose rather than representing tragic necessity. The Chaos Gods transform from enemies to be fought into aspects of divinity, to be embraced as complementary forces that drive existence toward perfection. The split extends through every level of imperial society as populations find themselves choosing between competing interpretations of identical beliefs, each side claiming perfect loyalty to the Emperor's vision, while reaching conclusions that make unity impossible. Planetary governors declare renewed faith in imperial doctrine, while implementing policies that serve purposes orthodox theology cannot explain. Military commanders maintain absolute dedication to established protocols while conducting operations that strategic analysis cannot fully comprehend. But the rise of new chaos cults claiming to follow Lorgar's true teachings creates additional layers of theological complexity as splinter groups emerge from both Orthodox and Reformed camps, their interpretations blending familiar elements in combinations that satisfy neither traditional believers nor those who embraced word-bearer revelations. These organizations show none of the corruption or madness that characterizes typical chaos worship, their members displaying devotion that appears genuine while somehow serving masters that no established doctrine acknowledges. The brother chaplain Mordian of the Firehawks leads his battle brothers in suppression operations against cult cells that quote imperial scripture with perfect accuracy, while conducting rituals that make even his enhanced mind struggle to distinguish between devotion and blasphemy. The heretics they face show no fear of death, no desperation of cornered enemies, no signs of external conditioning or coercion. They die with prayers to the emperor on their lips, while somehow serving purposes that orthodox training never addressed. The constant low-level religious warfare that erupts throughout the imperium defies conventional patterns of conflict as communities tear themselves apart along theological lines that make traditional measures of success and failure meaningless. These are not violent rebellions characterized by destruction and chaos, but theological disputes that leave all symbols and structures intact while fundamentally altering their meaning and purpose. On the hive world of Necromunda, Lord Helmauer attempts to maintain order among populations that embrace competing interpretations of imperial faith with fervor that borders on mania, their devotion to recognizable symbols masking divisions that threaten to fragment society along lines that no amount of administrative efficiency can bridge. The Underhive burns with religious warfare that operates through conversion rather than conquest, each side claiming to preserve the Emperor's truth while condemning their opponents for denying divine revelation. The pattern repeats across thousands of worlds as the theological revolution spreads through channels both mundane and mystical, its influence penetrating institutions that should be immune to spiritual corruption, while somehow strengthening rather than weakening their dedication to imperial service. Trade guilds maintain perfect efficiency while conducting business according to principles that orthodox doctrine never addressed. Military units follow established protocols while serving purposes that transcend conventional understanding of duty and loyalty. Intelligence reports filtering through imperial bureaucracy describe phenomena that strain rational explanation as word-bearer influence continues to operate despite apparent destruction of their leadership and organizational structure. But ancient sleeper cells activate across the galaxy with coordination that suggests surviving command hierarchy, their members moving to positions within institutions they have served loyally for decades, while somehow transforming the nature of that service from within. Inquisitor Lord Kyrian leads investigations that uncover evidence of theological preparation dating back to the Horus Heresy itself, suggesting that Lorgar's recent campaign represented culmination rather than beginning of efforts that have influenced imperial development for 10 millennia. Cathedral archives contain texts that anticipate recent developments with disturbing precision. Bloodlines traced through genealogical records reveal connections to word-bearer recruitment that carry conditioning activated only by specific theological triggers. The rumors of Lorgar's survival spread through whispered conversations that operate below the threshold of official attention while somehow influencing imperial policy at the highest levels. Astropathic monitoring stations report brief contacts with consciousness that bears familiar signatures despite apparent annihilation, communications that suggest existence in forms that transcend conventional understanding of life and death while maintaining sufficient coherence to continue guiding events through mechanisms that no mortal science can detect. Populations across the galaxy speak in hushed tones of golden figures that appear at moments of crisis, offering guidance that resolves immediate problems, while somehow advancing long-term objectives that serve purposes beyond local understanding. These manifestations show no signs of chaos, corruption, or supernatural coercion, their presence radiating peace and certainty that overwhelms resistance through sheer spiritual weight while maintaining perfect loyalty to imperial symbols and structures. The question of whether faith itself has been permanently corrupted haunts the corridors of the Imperial Palace as Lord Commander Guilliman struggles to govern populations whose devotion appears undiminished while somehow serving masters that orthodox doctrine declares anathema. Traditional measures of loyalty prove meaningless when subjects maintain perfect obedience to familiar commands while transforming their execution in ways that serve entirely different purposes. Chapter Master Calgar of the Ultramarines reports similar phenomena from across Ultramar as planets that embraced word-bearer doctrine during the campaign continue to function with efficiency that exceeds pre-conversion levels, their populations displaying unity that transcends traditional understanding of social cohesion, while somehow maintaining individual identity within collective consciousness that operates according to principles orthodox psychology cannot explain. The theological implications prove more devastating than any military defeat, as Imperial Command recognizes that preserving the Imperium's physical structure may have cost its spiritual foundation, saving the Emperor's body while potentially transforming his legacy in ways that make orthodox worship impossible to distinguish from reformed heresy. The war for humanity's soul may have ended not in triumph or defeat, but in synthesis that transcends both concepts while threatening to make familiar distinctions meaningless. Captain General Trajan Valoris maintains his vigil in the throne chamber, where the Emperor continues his eternal watch. Yet those with sufficient sensitivity detect changes that suggest transformation rather than diminishment. The master of mankind's consciousness appears to have absorbed elements of the confrontation with Lorgar, his awareness encompassing possibilities that it previously excluded while somehow maintaining essential nature that has sustained humanity through 10,000 years of darkness. The galaxy settles into patterns of existence that appear stable on the surface, while carrying potential for changes that may not manifest for decades or centuries, leaving those who fought in the theological war uncertain whether they preserved humanity's destiny or witnessed the beginning of its transformation into something altogether different. Populations maintain perfect loyalty to imperial symbols while somehow serving purposes that transcend orthodox understanding of devotion and obedience. Word-bearer fleets continue their work throughout the galaxy as scattered cells that operate through conversion rather than conquest, their influence spreading through mechanisms that bypass conventional security measures while somehow strengthening rather than weakening imperial efficiency and unity. These forces show no signs of traditional chaos corruption, their members displaying devotion that appears genuine while advancing objectives that serve purposes beyond immediate comprehension. The closing reflection that emerges from analysis of the campaign's ultimate consequences reveals possibilities too terrible for most minds to contemplate fully. Lorgar Aurelian may have achieved his ultimate objective not through victory, but through apparent defeat, transforming imperial faith from within while maintaining all familiar symbols and structures that make change invisible to casual observation. The first heretic's greatest triumph may lie in making heresy indistinguishable from orthodoxy. The theological revolution that began with whispered sermons in distant cathedral spires has concluded with transformation so complete that resistance becomes impossible to distinguish from collaboration, loyalty from betrayal, salvation from damnation. Humanity continues its eternal struggle against the darkness that threatens to consume it. Yet the nature of that darkness has evolved beyond recognition, while maintaining familiar forms that make its presence undetectable until transformation becomes irreversible. The Emperor's silence continues from his golden throne, yet those who possess knowledge to interpret deeper meanings recognize that his consciousness may have embraced possibilities that orthodox doctrine previously excluded, or accepting synthesis between order and chaos that preserves essential human nature, while allowing evolution towards states that transcend conventional understanding of mortality and divinity. In the cathedral districts of 10,000 worlds, the faithful gather to offer prayers that sound identical to those their ancestors have recited for millennia, yet somehow serve purposes that would have horrified previous generations, while providing meanings that make traditional theology seem incomplete rather than incorrect. The question of which gods they truly worship has become as meaningless as the distinction between truth and heresy in an age where both concepts have merged beyond recognition. The grim darkness of the far future continues its eternal march through time and space, yet something fundamental has shifted in the cosmic balance that determines humanity's relationship with forces that exist beyond mortal comprehension. Whether this represents evolution or devolution, salvation or damnation, transcendence or corruption, remains questions that language cannot address and minds cannot safely contemplate. The galaxy burns with familiar fires while serving new purposes, its populations maintaining perfect devotion to recognizable symbols, while somehow advancing objectives that transcend orthodox understanding of faith, loyalty, and the very nature of divine authority, in a cosmos where the boundaries between order and chaos have dissolved beyond any possibility of restoration. And in the deepest vaults beneath the imperial palace, where reality itself is reinforced against forces that exist beyond normal space and time, the golden throne continues its eternal hum, with subtle harmonics that suggest transformation rather than preservation, evolution rather than stagnation, synthesis rather than separation, between competing visions of humanity's ultimate destiny among the stars. The war is over. The war has only just begun. In the end, they may be the same thing.